Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm here with another late night session for all my fellow overthinkers out there. You know those nights when your brain just won't shut off? When every small interaction from the day keeps replaying on loop, and you're analysing conversations that happened 3 weeks ago? Yeah, I see you. So get comfortable, maybe grab a snack, and let's dive into some stories that prove we all deal with the same ridiculous human behaviour. Our first story comes from someone who learned that lending clothes to friends can complicate get fast. My friend borrowed my jacket and never gave it back. This happened about 6 months ago, and I'm still processing how weird the whole situation became. My'd Mira and friend. I have known each other since college, and we've always been pretty close. We hang out regularly, share clothes sometimes, the usual friendship stuff. Last winter, we were heading out to this outdoor concert together, and Mira realised she'd forgotten to bring a warm jacket. It was one of those unexpectedly cold nights where the temperature just dropped out of nowhere. I had brought an extra jacket, this really nice denim one that I'd gotten as a birthday gift from my sister. It wasn't expensive, but it had sentimental value, and I really loved how it looked on me. Mira asked if she could borrow it for the night, and of course I said yes. That's what friends do, right? She looked great in it, and we had an amazing time at the concert. At the end of the night, she was still wearing it when we parted ways, and I figured she'd give it back the next time we hung out. A week went by, then 2 weeks. I didn't want to be that person who immediately asks for their stuff back, so I waited for her to bring it up naturally, but she never did. When we'd hang out, she wouldn't be wearing it, and she never mentioned it. I started dropping subtle hints, like commenting on how cold it was and saying I needed to find my jacket, but nothing seemed to register. After about a month, I started seeing the jacket in her Instagram photos. At first, it was just in the background of her outfit posts, but then she started wearing it more prominently. She'd post these mirror selfies, where the jacket was clearly the focal point of her outfit. In the captions, she'd talk about her favourite jacket, or her go-to denim piece. I was confused and a little hurt, but I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she just forgot where she got it from. Maybe she was planning to give it back and just kept forgetting. I decided to bring it up directly the next time we hung out. When I asked about the jacket, Mira looked genuinely confused. She asked what jacket I was talking about, so I described it and mentioned that she'd borrowed it at the concert. Her response completely caught me off guard. She said she remembered borrowing a jacket that night, but she thought I had told her she could keep it. She insisted that I'd said something like, "You can have that one," when she complimented how it looked on her. I knew for certain that I'd never said anything like that. I clearly remembered lending it to her for the night, not giving it away. But she seemed so convinced that I started questioning my own memory. Had I somehow given her the wrong impression? Was I misremembering the conversation? The situation got even more awkward when I showed her some of her own Instagram posts where she was wearing the jacket. I pointed out that she'd been calling it her favourite piece and styling whole outfits around it. Instead of acknowledging that this was strange, she got defensive. She said she never claimed it was hers originally, and that she'd been planning to give it back eventually. But then she added that she'd gotten so many compliments on it that she'd hate to stop wearing it now. That's when I realised this wasn't about a misunderstanding. Mira had decided she wanted to keep my jacket, and she was using confusion and gaslighting to make it happen. She suggested that since it looked so good on her, and she wore it more than I probably would, maybe it made sense for her to keep it. She offered to buy me a similar one, completely missing the point that this particular jacket had sentimental value. I felt like I was going crazy. Here was my friend of several years wearing my clothes in photos, calling them hers, and then trying to convince me that I'd given them away. The jacket itself wasn't worth fighting over, but the principle of the whole thing was eating at me. I decided to let it go, but our friendship changed after that. I stopped offering to share clothes or lend her things. I became more careful about what I brought when we hung out together, and every time I saw her wearing that jacket in photos, I felt this weird mix of anger and sadness. The strangest part is that Mira never seemed to understand why I was upset. To this day, she acts like the whole thing was just a miscommunication, and she genuinely believes she has every right to keep wearing it. She's even asked to borrow other things since then, with no apparent awareness of how the jacket situation affected our friendship. I've learned that some people have a very different understanding of boundaries and ownership than I do. What I thought was a simple favour between friends became this weird psychological game where my own memory was being questioned. It's made me much more cautious about lending things to people, even close friends. The jacket has become this symbol of how someone can slowly gaslight you into doubting your own experiences. Every time I see it on her social media, I'm reminded that sometimes people will take advantage of your kindness and then make you feel like the unreasonable one for being upset about it. That story ends there. The psychological manipulation of turning a borrowed jacket into a permanent acquisition is honestly impressive in the worst possible way. Some people really will gaslight you about your own belongings and then act confused when you're upset about it. The audacity of styling entire outfits around someone else's clothes and posting them online is just next level. Speaking of friends who cross boundaries, this next story involves someone who thought destroying a birthday cake would be hilarious. My cousin tried to ruin my birthday cake as a prank. This happened at my 25th birthday party last month, and I'm still trying to understand what goes through someone's head when they think something like this is funny. I'd been planning this party for weeks because it was a milestone birthday, and I wanted to celebrate with all my favourite people. I'm not usually someone who goes all out for birthdays, but 25 felt significant. I rented a community centre, sent out proper invitations, and even hired a DJ. The whole thing was more elaborate than anything I'd done before, but I was excited about bringing everyone together. The cake was probably the thing I was most excited about. I'd ordered it from this amazing local bakery that specialises in custom designs. It was 3 layers with this intricate buttercream frosting design that matched the party's colour scheme. The baker had spent hours on the decorative work, and when I picked it up that morning, I nearly cried because it was so perfect. My cousin Jonah has always been the type who thinks he's the comedian of the family. He's 23, just a couple years younger than me, and he's always trying to be the centre of attention at family gatherings. Usually his jokes are harmless, if a little annoying, making funny faces during photos, doing impressions of other family members, that sort of thing. The party was going really well. People were dancing, the food was great, and everyone seemed to be having a good time. I was feeling really happy and grateful that so many people had come out to celebrate with me. We'd been partying for about 2 hours, and it was time to bring out the cake. I had asked a few friends to help me carry it out from the kitchen, where we'd been keeping it safe. The plan was to set it up on the main table, light the candles, and do the whole birthday song routine. I was walking behind the cake, watching carefully to make sure nobody bumped into it, when Jonah appeared out of nowhere. He was clearly drunk, which should have been my first warning sign. Jonah gets really loud and impulsive when he's been drinking, but I'd never seen him do anything actually destructive before. He started making jokes about how fancy the cake looked, saying stuff like, "Wow, someone's getting bougie for their birthday." I was laughing along, not thinking much of his comments, when suddenly he said, "Let me get the first taste," and shoved his entire hand straight into the middle of the cake. Not just a finger for a little frosting, his whole hand, palm down, right through the top layer and into the second layer. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone had stopped the party just what they were doing and stared. I looked down at my beautiful cake, now with a huge hand-shaped crater in the centre, and I couldn't even process what had just happened. Buttercream frosting was dripping off Jonah's hand onto the floor, and he was standing there with this huge grin like he'd just delivered the punchline to the world's funniest joke. The first emotion I felt was confusion, like my brain couldn't understand why someone would destroy something that clearly meant so much to me. Then came the anger, followed immediately by this crushing disappointment. All the planning, all the excitement about this perfect cake, just ruined in one impulsive moment. Jonah seemed to realise pretty quickly that nobody was laughing. The room was completely silent, except for the music still playing in the background. He looked around at everyone's faces and started backpedaling immediately. "Come on, it's just a cake," he said, wiping his hand on his shirt. "We can still eat it. It'll taste the same." But it wasn't just a cake. It was the centerpiece of my birthday celebration, something I'd been looking forward to for weeks. It was the moment when everyone would sing to me, and I'd make a wish and blow out candles. All of that was gone, because Jonah thought it would be funny to stick his hand in it. My mum was the first person to speak up. She started yelling at Jonah, asking him what was wrong with him, and why he would do something so thoughtless. Other family members joined in, and suddenly everyone was either yelling at Jonah or trying to figure out if the cake could be salvaged. Jonah got defensive really quickly. He kept insisting it was just a prank, that everyone was overreacting, that we could just cut around the damaged part and everything would be fine. He seemed genuinely confused about why people were so upset with him. He kept saying things like, "It's not that serious," and "You guys need to learn how to take a joke." The worst part was watching my friends' reactions. These were people who didn't know Jonah well, and they were seeing this side of my family for the first time. I felt embarrassed and angry and sad all at the same time. Some of them tried to help clean up the mess. Others just stood there awkwardly, not knowing what to do. We did end up cutting around the damaged part and salvaging what we could of the cake, but the whole moment was ruined. When we finally sang Happy Birthday, all I could think about was the giant hole in the middle of what should have been my perfect cake. The photos from that part of the night all show this sad, partially destroyed cake, instead of the beautiful one I'd been so excited about. Jonah left the party early, claiming that everyone was being too dramatic, and that he didn't want to deal with the negative energy. He never apologized properly, just kept insisting that it was meant to be funny and that we all overreacted. The incident has affected our relationship ever since. At family gatherings now, I find myself being cautious around him, not trusting him to respect boundaries or think before he acts. What bothers me most is that he still doesn't understand why what he did was so hurtful. To him, it was just a spontaneous joke that didn't land well. To me, it was a thoughtless act that ruined something special. I've realised that some people don't consider the emotional weight of their actions. They see a cake and think food, but they don't see the hours of planning, the excitement, the symbolic importance of the moment. Jonah destroyed more than just buttercream and sponge cake. He destroyed the centerpiece moment of my celebration, and he did it for a laugh that nobody found funny. That story is over. Imagine being so desperate for attention that you destroy someone's birthday cake and then act like everyone else is the problem for being upset. Some people really think it's just a prank excuses any level of thoughtless behaviour, completely ignoring the emotional impact of their actions. Our next story comes from someone who learned that not everyone understands the difference between forgetting and abandoning. My partner forgot to pick me up after work and went out with friends instead. This happened 3 weeks ago, and I'm still processing how someone can just completely forget about another person like that. Ivy and I have been together for about 8 months, and usually they're pretty reliable when it comes to plans we've made. I work at a retail job downtown, and my shift ends at 9 p.m. The bus system in our area stops running around that time, so getting home without a car can be really complicated. Ivy knows this, and they'd offered to pick me up after work that particular Thursday because their schedule was flexible and they wanted to help out. We talked about it that morning before I left for work. Ivy said they'd be there around 9:15 to give me time to close up the store and get my things together. I was actually looking forward to the ride home because we'd been busy with work and school lately and hadn't had much time to just talk and catch up. My shift ended on time and I finished all my closing duties by 9:10. I texted Ivy to let them know I was ready and headed outside to wait in front of the store. The weather had been nice earlier that day, but by evening it had started drizzling. Just enough to be annoying, but not quite enough to justify going back inside. 9:15 came and went. Then 9:30, I texted Ivy again, asking where they were and if everything was okay. No response. By 9:45, I was getting worried because Ivy usually responds to texts pretty quickly, especially when we have definite plans like this. I tried calling around 10 p.m, but it went straight to voicemail. That's when I started wondering if something had happened to them. Maybe their car broke down, or there was a family emergency, or they were in some kind of trouble. I left a voicemail, asking them to call me back and let me know they were safe. The drizzle had turned into actual rain by this point, and I was getting soaked standing under the store's awning. I realised I was going to have to figure out another way home. I called a rideshare, which cost me almost $30, money I really couldn't afford to spend on transportation. During the ride home, I kept checking my phone, expecting to see a missed call or text from Ivy explaining what had happened. Maybe they'd been in an accident, or their phone died, or there was some other legitimate emergency that prevented them from picking me up or even letting me know they couldn't make it. When I got home around 10:45, I immediately checked Ivy's social media to see if there were any clues about where they were or what might have happened. What I found made my stomach drop. Ivy had posted Instagram stories throughout the evening, showing them hanging out with their college friends at some bar across town. The timeline was what really got me. The first story was posted at 8:30, showing them laughing with friends over drinks. Another one at 9:20, right around the time they were supposed to be picking me up, showed them playing pool. The most recent story, posted just 20 minutes before I checked, showed them doing karaoke with a group of people I didn't recognise. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Ivy hadn't forgotten about me because of an emergency or some unavoidable situation. They'd forgotten about me because they were having fun with other people, and I just didn't cross their mind. I'd spent over an hour standing in the rain, worried about their safety, while they were posting happy photos from a bar. I tried calling one more time before going to bed, but again it went to voicemail. I didn't leave another message because I didn't trust myself to sound calm. I was angry, hurt and confused about how someone could just completely forget about plans they'd made with their partner. Ivy finally texted me the next morning around 11 a.m. The message just said, "OMG, I'm so sorry, I totally forgot about last night. Are you mad?" No explanation, no acknowledgement of how long I'd waited or how worried I'd been. Just a casual apology that made it sound like they'd forgotten to return a phone call or something equally minor. I waited a few hours before responding because I wanted to think about what to say. When I finally texted back, I explained how I'd waited in the rain for over an hour, how worried I'd been about their safety, and how hurt I was that they'd forgotten about me while they were out having fun with friends. Ivy's response was defensive. They said they felt bad about forgetting, but that I was being dramatic about the whole thing. They pointed out that I could have just taken a rideshare from the beginning instead of waiting around. They said everyone forgets things sometimes, and that I should understand that they'd just gotten caught up with friends they hadn't seen in a while. What bothered me most was that Ivy didn't seem to understand the difference between forgetting something minor and forgetting that another person was depending on you. This wasn't like forgetting to pick up milk at the store or missing a TV show. I had been stranded at work in the rain with no reliable way to get home, trusting that they would be there for me. The conversation continued over text for the next few days, with Ivy insisting that I was overreacting, and me trying to explain why their forgetting felt like such a big betrayal of trust. They kept saying things like, "It's not that deep, and you're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be." Eventually, Ivy did apologise more sincerely, acknowledging that they should have at least texted me when they decided to go out with friends instead of picking me up, but they still didn't seem to fully grasp why I was so upset. To them, it was just a mistake that happened because they got distracted. To me, it was a sign that I wasn't a priority in their life. The incident has changed how I think about depending on Ivy for important things. I've started making backup plans for situations where I would have previously just trusted them to follow through. It's not that I don't trust them at all anymore, but I've learnt that their memory and attention can be unreliable when they're having fun with other people. What hurts most is the feeling that I'm forgettable to someone who's supposed to care about me. When you love someone, you don't forget that they're standing in the rain waiting for you. You don't post happy social media updates while someone you care about is worried and stranded. The fact that Ivy could be having such a great time while completely forgetting about me made me question how much I actually matter to them. That story ends there. Getting left in the rain while your partner posts Instagram stories from a bar is the kind of thing that rewrites how you see someone. The casual, "Are you mad?" text the next morning, like they forgot to water a plant instead of abandoning a human being, is just breathtaking. Moving on to someone who learned that family members can be surprisingly territorial about television programming. My sibling deletes my shows from the DVR. This has been an ongoing issue in my household for the past 6 months, and it's driving me absolutely insane. My brother Theo and I both live at home while we're in college, and we share the family DVR system. What started as minor scheduling conflicts has turned into this weird, passive-aggressive war over digital storage space. I'm really into serialized dramas and documentaries, the kind of shows that you have to watch in order and pay attention to. I record things like limited series, true crime documentaries, and these complex dramas that have ongoing storylines. These aren't shows you can just jump into at any random episode. They require commitment and continuity. Theo, on the other hand, is obsessed with sports. He records every game for his favourite teams, plus playoff games for teams he doesn't even follow, plus highlight shows, plus sports commentary programmes that analyse games that happened weeks ago. His sports recordings take up probably 70% of our DVR space at any given time. The problem started when our DVR began running out of storage space. Instead of talking to me about it, or figuring out a system for managing the recordings together, Theo just started deleting my shows to make room for his sports content. The first time it happened, I thought it was an accident. I'd been recording this limited series about a cold case murder investigation. It was only 6 episodes, and I was planning to binge watch it over the weekend. When I went to watch it on Saturday morning, only 3 episodes were there. The other 3 had been deleted, and in their place were recordings of basketball games from teams I'd never heard of. When I asked Theo about it, he said the DVR was full and something had to go. He claimed he'd chosen my shows to delete because his sports recordings were time-sensitive, and mine were just regular TV shows that I could probably find online somewhere. He didn't seem to understand that deleting random episodes from the middle of a series made the remaining episodes completely useless. I explained that you can't just watch episodes 3, 4, and 5 of a murder mystery and expect to understand what's happening. He shrugged and said, I should have watched them faster if they were important to me. He suggested I could probably find summaries online of the episodes I'd missed. I tried to establish some ground rules for the DVR usage. I suggested we each get a certain amount of storage space, or that we check with each other before deleting anything, or that we prioritise new episodes over old ones. Theo agreed to these rules in principle, but his behaviour didn't change at all. 2 weeks later, it happened again. I'd been recording a documentary series about environmental issues, something I needed to watch for one of my classes. I was 3 episodes into a 6-part series when I discovered that episodes 2 and 4 had been deleted. In their place were recordings of college football games that had happened months ago. This time, Theo's excuse was that he needed to record the big game that weekend, and my documentaries were taking up too much space. When I pointed out that he had dozens of old games recorded that he could delete instead, he said those games were classics that he might want to rewatch someday. Apparently, his hypothetical future rewatching was more important than my actual current viewing. The most frustrating incident happened last month with a show I'd been following for the entire season. It was this complex political drama with multiple storylines and character arcs that had been building for months. I'd invested hours into this show, watching every episode, following all the plot developments. The season finale was supposed to record on a Tuesday night. I'd been looking forward to it all week because the previous episode had ended on this huge cliffhanger. When I went to watch it Wednesday evening, the finale wasn't there. Instead, there was a recording of a spring training baseball game from a team Theo doesn't even follow. I confronted him immediately, and this time he didn't even pretend to be sorry. He said that baseball season was starting, which was more important than some made-up TV drama. He told me that sports are real and meaningful, while scripted television shows are just entertainment that doesn't matter. That's when I realised this wasn't really about storage space or scheduling conflicts. This was about Theo genuinely believing that his interests were more valuable and important than mine. In his mind, sports recordings deserved priority because sports are real, while my shows were just frivolous entertainment that I should be able to sacrifice. I've tried explaining that television shows can be just as meaningful and engaging as sports, that storytelling and character development require the same kind of investment and attention that following a sports team does. But Theo sees his sports viewing as somehow more legitimate than my interest in narrative television. The situation has gotten so bad that I've started watching my shows as soon as they air instead of recording them for later. This means staying up late on school nights or rearranging my schedule around TV programming, which is ridiculous. But it's the only way to ensure that Theo won't delete something I want to see. I've also started keeping a list of everything I have recorded, with episode numbers and air dates, so I can immediately tell when something's been deleted. It's exhausting having to monitor the DVR like this, but I've learned that Theo will delete my content without any warning or discussion. What bothers me most is the complete lack of consideration for my time and interests. When Theo deletes the middle episodes of a series I'm watching, he's essentially stealing hours of my life that I've already invested in those characters and storylines. He's making decisions about my entertainment that affect my ability to enjoy something I care about. The worst part is that he genuinely doesn't understand why I'm upset. To him, it's just TV, and I should be flexible about when and how I watch things. He can't see that following a complex narrative requires continuity, or that having episodes randomly deleted is incredibly frustrating for someone who's invested in a story. I've started looking into getting my own streaming subscriptions, or finding other ways to watch my shows that don't depend on our shared DVR. It's an extra expense I shouldn't have to take on, but it's better than constantly fighting with Theo about storage space and priorities. This whole situation has made me realise how differently people can view the same entertainment technology. To me, the DVR is a shared resource that should be managed fairly between family members. To Theo, it's apparently his personal sports archive, and everything else is just taking up space that rightfully belongs to his recordings. That story's over. Deleting someone's episodes from the middle of a series is like ripping pages out of a book they're reading and then acting confused about why they're upset. The sports supremacy attitude makes it even worse, like somehow watching grown men throw balls around is more intellectually valid than following a complex narrative. Let's move on to a story about someone who discovered that borrowing without asking can lead to some expensive consequences. My friend took my phone charger on a trip without asking. This happened 2 months ago when my friend Clint went on a week-long camping trip with some college buddies. What should have been a simple case of forgetting to pack something turned into this whole ordeal about respect and responsibility that I'm still dealing with. Clint and I hang out pretty regularly, and he's always been the type of person who's a bit scatterbrained about planning and preparation. He'll show up places without bringing what he needs, or he'll realise at the last minute that he's forgotten something important. Usually, this just means borrowing small things like pens or asking to use someone's phone to make a call. The day before his camping trip, Clint came over to my apartment to hang out and help me put together some furniture I'd bought. We spent the afternoon building a bookshelf and just talking about his upcoming trip. He seemed excited, but also stressed about making sure he had everything he needed for a week in the wilderness. While we were hanging out, Clint's phone died, so I let him use my charger to power it back up. My charger was this really nice, fast-charging cable that I'd bought specifically for my phone model. It wasn't just any generic charger. It was designed to work perfectly with my device, and it had cost me about $40. We finished building the bookshelf, ordered some dinner, and watched a movie. Around 10 p.m, Clint said he needed to head home to finish packing for his early morning departure. He gathered up his jacket and keys, said goodbye, and left. I didn't think anything of it until the next morning when I went to charge my phone and couldn't find my charger anywhere. I searched my entire apartment, thinking maybe I'd moved it somewhere and forgotten. I checked all the usual places, under couch cushions in my bedroom, even in the kitchen in case I'd carried it around while doing other things. Nothing. That's when I realised Clint must have accidentally taken it with him when he left. I tried calling him to let him know he'd grabbed my charger by mistake, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I figured he was probably already on the road, or maybe in an area with poor cell service. I left a message explaining the situation and asking him to call me back when he could. Days went by without hearing anything from Clint. I tried texting and calling several more times, but never got a response. I started getting genuinely worried that something had happened to him on the camping trip. Maybe he'd gotten lost or injured, or maybe there had been some kind of accident. In the meantime, I had to buy a new charger because I needed my phone to work. I couldn't wait a whole week for Clint to get back, especially since I wasn't even sure if he had my charger or if I'd just lost it somewhere. The replacement charger cost me another $40, which was frustrating but necessary. After a week, I saw Clint posting photos from his camping trip on social media. He was clearly fine, having a great time with his friends, posting pictures of campfires and hiking trails, and group shots of everyone looking happy and outdoors. I felt relieved that he was safe, but also confused about why he hadn't responded to any of my messages. When Clint finally got back in town, he texted me asking if I wanted to hang out. I immediately asked about my charger, and his response was casual to the point of being insulting. He said, "Oh yeah, I grabbed that by accident. I'll bring it back next time I see you." No apology for taking it without asking. No acknowledgement that I'd been trying to reach him all week. No recognition that I might have needed my charger while he was gone. Just a casual confirmation that yes, he had taken my property, and yes, he'd give it back eventually when it was convenient for him. When we finally met up 3 days later, Clint handed me a plastic bag containing my charger, but when I examined it, I could see that it was damaged. The cable had several kinks and bends in it that hadn't been there before, and the connector end looked like it had been forced into devices it wasn't designed for. When I tested it, it barely worked and charged my phone much slower than it used to. I asked Clint what had happened to it, and he explained that they'd used it to charge multiple people's devices during the camping trip. Apparently, several people had forgotten their chargers, so my cable had been passed around the group for a week, used on different phone models, and probably handled pretty roughly in outdoor conditions. Clint seemed genuinely surprised that I was upset about the condition of my charger when he returned it. He said it still works, didn't it? When I explained that it was damaged and didn't work properly anymore, he shrugged and said that's what happens when you use things. He acted like the wear and tear was just normal and expected. What frustrated me most was his complete lack of understanding about what he'd done wrong. Taking something without asking, ignoring my attempts to contact him, using my property for purposes I hadn't agreed to, and then returning it in damaged condition. Each of these things individually would have been annoying, but together they felt like a complete violation of basic friendship boundaries. When I explained that he'd essentially cost me $80, since I'd had to buy a replacement charger and now needed to buy another one to replace the damaged one he'd returned, Clint got defensive. He said it was just an accident, that he hadn't meant to take it, and that I was being unreasonable about normal wear and tear. He offered to pay for half of a new charger, which he seemed to think was generous since the original taking of the charger had been accidental. But in my mind, once you realise you've accidentally taken something that belongs to someone else, you become responsible for returning it in the same condition you found it. The whole situation made me realise that Clint and I have very different ideas about personal property and responsibility. To him, Accidentally taking something makes any subsequent damage just an unfortunate mishap that we should split the cost of. To me, taking something without permission, even accidentally, makes you responsible for any consequences of that action. We're still friends, but I've become much more careful about leaving my belongings out when Clint is around. I've also learned to be more explicit about things like, please don't touch that, or make sure you have everything you brought with you when he's leaving my place. That story ends there. Taking someone's charger on a week-long trip, using it as a community charging station, and then returning it broken while acting like that's just normal wear and tear is honestly impressive levels of irresponsibility. The casual attitude about owing someone $80 because of your mistake is just the cherry on top. Our next story takes us into the world of family dinner politics, where one family member has appointed themselves the food police. My aunt always comments on my plate at family dinners. This has been happening for as long as I can remember, but it's gotten worse over the past few years as our family gatherings have become more frequent. Rosa is my dad's sister, and she's always had opinions about everything, but her fixation on what other people eat has reached the point where I dread sitting near her at any meal. Rosa is in her early 60s and has this way of making observations that sound like they're coming from a place of concern, but they're actually just judgmental comments disguised as caring. She'll look at your plate and then look at you with this expression that suggests she's deeply worried about your life choices. The comments started when I was a teenager. I'd load up my plate at holiday dinners the way any growing kid does, and Rosa would make remarks like, "Oh my, that's quite a portion for someone your size," or "Are you sure you can finish all that?" At the time, I thought she was just being a typical aunt, maybe trying to teach me about moderation or proper manners. But the comments never stopped, even as I got older. Now I'm 26 and Rosa still feels the need to comment on everything I put on my plate. If I take a large serving, she'll say something like, "Well, someone's hungry today," with this fake laugh that makes everyone at the table uncomfortable. If I take a small serving, she'll ask if I'm feeling okay or suggest that I need to eat more to keep my strength up. The worst part is that she does this in front of the entire family. Rosa never makes these comments quietly or privately. She announces them loud enough for everyone to hear, which means that suddenly everyone's attention is focused on what I'm eating and how much. It's humiliating and makes me hyper-aware of every bite I take. Last Thanksgiving was particularly awful. I was going through a stressful period at work and had been eating poorly for weeks, so I was actually looking forward to a nice, home-cooked meal with the family. I made my plate with reasonable portions of turkey, stuffing and vegetables, nothing excessive or unusual. As I sat down, Rosa immediately zeroed in on my plate. "Oh, honey," she said in this loud, concerned voice. "Are you really going to eat all that? That's an awful lot of food for dinner." The entire conversation at the table stopped, and suddenly everyone was looking at me and my plate like it was some kind of spectacle. I tried to laugh it off and change the subject, but Rosa wasn't done. She started talking about how important it is to practice portion control, especially during the holidays when it's easy to overindulge. She mentioned an article she'd read about healthy eating habits and suggested that maybe I should take smaller portions and go back for seconds if I was still hungry. The thing is, Rosa's own eating habits are far from perfect. She'll pile her plate just as high as anyone else, but she seems to think she has some kind of exemption from the rules she applies to everyone else. She'll take 3 servings of dessert while lecturing someone else about their dinner portions. What makes it even more frustrating is that other family members just sit there and let it happen. Nobody ever tells Rosa that her comments are inappropriate or hurtful. They'll look uncomfortable, maybe change the subject eventually, but nobody actually stands up to her. It's like they've all just accepted that this is how Rosa behaves, and the rest of us have to deal with it. The comments aren't just about quantity either. Rosa will make remarks about the types of food I choose. If I skip the vegetables, she'll ask if I'm getting enough nutrients in my diet. If I take extra bread, she'll make some comment about carbohydrates. If I put butter on my roll, she'll suggest that I try it without butter first to see if I really need it. She's also started making comments about my eating speed. If I eat quickly, she'll tell me to slow down and enjoy my food. If I eat slowly, she'll ask if something's wrong with the meal or if I'm not feeling well. There's literally no way to eat around Rosa without receiving some kind of commentary. The situation came to a head at my cousin's birthday dinner last month. I'd had a long day at work and hadn't eaten lunch, so I was genuinely hungry. I made my plate with what I thought were normal portions, but Rosa immediately started in with her usual comments. "Goodness gracious," she said, loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "Are you planning to eat all of that yourself?" I finally snapped. I told Rosa that her constant comments about my food were inappropriate and hurtful, and that I was an adult who could make my own decisions about what and how much to eat. I explained that her remarks made me uncomfortable and asked her to please stop making them. Rosa's reaction was to get defensive and claim that she was only trying to help. She said she cared about my health and well-being and that someone needed to look out for me, since I obviously wasn't looking out for myself. She made it sound like her criticism was actually a form of love and support. The worst part was when she started crying, claiming that I was being mean to her and that she didn't deserve to be attacked for caring about family. Suddenly, I was the bad guy for asking her to stop commenting on my food choices. Other family members started telling me that I should apologize to Rosa for hurting her feelings. Since that incident, Rosa has been more subtle with her comments, but they haven't stopped completely. Now she'll make her observations to other people at the table instead of directly to me, but loud enough that I can still hear them. She'll lean over to my mum and say things like, "I'm worried about how much she's eating," or "Do you think she's taking care of herself?" I've started dreading family gatherings because I know that Rosa will find something to say about my eating habits. I've tried eating before I arrive so I can take smaller portions, but then she comments on how little I'm eating. I've tried serving myself exactly what she serves herself, but she still finds something to criticize. The whole situation has made me realize that some people use food as a way to control and judge others. Rosa's comments aren't really about health or concern. They're about her need to feel superior and to have something to criticize. Food is just an easy target because everyone has to eat, and there's always something someone can find fault with. What bothers me most is how Rosa's behavior has affected my relationship with food at family gatherings. Instead of enjoying meals with people I love, I'm constantly anxious about what I'm eating and how it will be perceived. I find myself making food choices based not on what I want or what will make me happy, but on what will generate the least commentary from Rosa. That story ends there. Nothing kills the joy of a family meal, quite like having someone provide live commentary on your plate, like they're a sports announcer calling a food game. The fake concern wrapped around pure judgment is just masterful manipulation, especially the tears when finally called out. Moving on to someone who discovered that some people treat gifts very differently than others. My partner still keeps gifts from their ex. This became an issue about 4 months into my relationship with Ethan, when I started spending more time at his apartment and really noticing the things he had around. At first I thought I was just being paranoid or overly sensitive, but the more I paid attention, the more obvious it became that a significant number of his possessions were gifts from his previous relationship. Ethan and I have been together for about 10 months now, and things are generally really good between us. He's thoughtful, funny, and we have great chemistry, but his ex-girlfriend Maya was a big part of his life for almost 3 years, and apparently she was someone who gave very memorable gifts. The first thing I noticed was a really nice leather jacket hanging in his closet. It was clearly expensive and well made, and it looked great on him. When I complimented it one day, he casually mentioned that Maya had given it to him for his birthday 2 years ago. He said it so matter-of-factly that I didn't think much of it at the time. But then I started noticing other things. The coffee table in his living room, which I'd always admired, was another gift from Maya. So was the really nice watch he wore to work every day, and the bookshelf in his bedroom, and the expensive headphones he used when he worked from home. It seemed like everywhere I looked, there was something that Maya had given him. The gifts weren't just practical items either. They were personal, romantic gifts that felt weird for me to encounter as his current girlfriend. A framed photo of a sunset that Maya had taken during one of their trips together, sitting on his nightstand. A playlist she'd made him, still saved on his phone and occasionally playing when we were listening to music together. What made it more complicated was that these weren't just random objects he'd forgotten about. Ethan actively used and displayed these gifts. He wore the day and clearly took good care of all jacket regularly, used the headphones the items Maya had given him. It wasn't like they were packed away in storage somewhere, forgotten remnants of a past relationship. When I finally brought up how uncomfortable the situation made me feel, Ethan was genuinely surprised by my reaction. He said he'd never thought of the gifts as being problematic because they were just things, practical items that served a purpose in his daily life. He couldn't understand why the fact that they came from an ex-girlfriend should matter if they were useful, and he liked them. I tried to explain that seeing reminders of his, like I was competing with her presence, ex-girlfriend, throughout his apartment, made me feel like she was still part of his daily life, in a way that made me uncomfortable. Every time I saw him wearing that jacket or using those headphones, I was reminded that another woman had chosen those things specifically for him, had put thought and care into selecting them. Ethan's response was that I was being unreasonable and possessive. He said that Maya was his past and I was his present and future, and that getting rid of perfectly good items just because of who had given them to him was wasteful and illogical. He pointed out that he'd never do anything like that if the situations were reversed, and that he thought I should be more mature about the whole thing. The conversation escalated when I suggested that maybe he could keep some of the more practical items, but put away the obviously romantic ones, like the framed photo and the playlist. Ethan got defensive and said that I was trying to erase his history and control his possessions. He accused me of being insecure and said that he shouldn't have to throw away things he valued just to make me feel better. What frustrated me most was his insistence that these items were just things with no emotional significance. If they were really just practical objects with no sentimental value, then why was he so adamant about keeping them? Why was the idea of replacing them with new items so upsetting to him? It seemed like he was trying to have it both ways, claiming the gifts meant nothing while also refusing to part with them. The issue came to a head when we were getting ready for a date, and Ethan put on the leather jacket Maya had given him. Something about seeing him wear a gift from another woman while we were going out together just hit me wrong. I asked if he could wear a different jacket, and he acted like I was being completely unreasonable. He said that it was his favourite jacket and that he wasn't going to change his clothes because of my hang-ups about his ex-girlfriend. He accused me of trying to control what he wore and said that if I couldn't handle him owning things that came from previous relationships, then maybe I wasn't ready to date someone who'd had serious relationships before. We ended up having a huge fight about it, with both of us saying things we probably shouldn't have. I felt like Ethan was prioritizing objects over my feelings, and he felt like I was being possessive and trying to rewrite his history. We barely spoke for the rest of the evening. Since that fight, we've reached an uneasy truce where we just don't talk about the gifts anymore. Ethan still has all of Maya's presents, still uses them regularly, and I've learned to bite my tongue when I see them. But the tension is still there, simmering under the surface of our relationship. I've started to wonder if this is just something I need to accept about dating someone who had a long-term relationship before me, or if my feelings about the situation are legitimate. I don't want to be the controlling girlfriend who makes her boyfriend throw away all his possessions, but I also don't want to feel like I'm constantly reminded of his ex every time I'm at his place. The whole situation has made me question whether Ethan is really as over Maya as he claims to be. If someone was truly finished with a relationship, wouldn't they naturally want to distance themselves from reminders of that person? The fact that he's so attached to keeping everything she gave him makes me wonder if there are still unresolved feelings there. What bothers me most is that Ethan seems completely unable to understand why this situation would be hurtful to me. He approaches it from a purely logical perspective, focusing on the practical value of the items, but he can't or won't acknowledge the emotional impact of being surrounded by another woman's gifts when I'm trying to build a relationship with him. That story is over. Living in a shrine to someone's ex-girlfriend while being told it's all just stuff is psychological torture. If those items truly meant nothing beyond their practical value, replacing them wouldn't be such an emotional battlefield. Let's hear from someone who learned that certain friends think embarrassment is the highest form of comedy. My friend brings up embarrassing stories in front of new people. Juliet and I have been friends since high school, and she's always had this habit of oversharing and making jokes at other people's expense. But what used to feel like harmless teasing between close friends has become genuinely humiliating now that we're adults meeting new people in professional and social settings. The pattern is always the same. We'll be at a party, work event, or just hanging out with people I don't know very well, and Juliet will somehow work an embarrassing story about me into the conversation. She does it in this casual, friendly way that makes it seem like she's just being playful, but the stories she chooses to tell are always ones that make me look foolish or awkward. Last month, we were at a networking event for my industry. I'd been talking to this woman who works for a company I'm really interested in, and we were having a great professional conversation about potential opportunities. Juliet joined our conversation, and within 5 minutes had told the story about how I'd gotten food poisoning at a work conference 2 years ago and spent the entire day running between meetings and the bathroom. The story isn't inherently that embarrassing, but the way Juliet told it, with all the graphic details about my stomach issues and how I'd tried to hide what was happening from my colleagues, made me sound unprofessional and gross. The woman I'd been networking with looked uncomfortable and found an excuse to end our conversation pretty quickly after that. When I confronted Juliet about it later, she acted like I was overreacting. She said it was just a funny story and that everyone has embarrassing moments. She claimed she was trying to make me seem more relatable and human, not trying to embarrass me. But the timing and context of her storytelling always seems designed to undercut me in social situations. The worst incident happened at a house party where I was hoping to make a good impression on this guy I'd been talking to online. We'd been chatting for weeks and had finally decided to meet in person. The conversation was going really well, and I was feeling confident and attractive, and like maybe this could turn into something real. Then Juliet showed up and immediately launched into the story about my disastrous attempt to dye my hair at home during college. She described in vivid detail how I turned my hair orange, then tried to fix it with more dye, and ended up with this patchy green-brown mess that took months to grow out. She even pulled out her phone to show him before and after pictures that I'd forgotten she had. The guy was polite about it, but I could see his interest in me visibly diminish as Juliet told her story. What had been a flirty, romantic conversation turned into him seeing me as this silly, incompetent person who makes bad decisions and ends up in ridiculous situations. The chemistry we'd built up over weeks of messaging evaporated in about 10 minutes. Juliet's defense is always that she's just trying to be funny and that she tells embarrassing stories about herself too. But that's not really true. When Juliet shares stories about her own mistakes, they're usually ones that make her seem endearingly quirky or charmingly imperfect. When she tells stories about me, they're ones that make me seem genuinely foolish or incompetent. She also has this way of framing her stories that makes it seem like my embarrassing moments say something fundamental about my character. She'll say things like, "This is so typical of her," or "She always does things like this," as if one awkward incident represents some deep personality flaw that defines who I am as a person. The pattern has gotten so predictable that I've started feeling anxious whenever we're in social situations together. I find myself monitoring conversations, trying to steer them away from topics that might remind Juliet of embarrassing stories she could tell. I've started avoiding bringing her to events where I'm trying to make professional connections or meet new romantic interests. When I've tried to talk to Juliet about how her storytelling affects me, she gets defensive and accuses me of being too sensitive. She says that real friends should be able to laugh about embarrassing moments together, and that my discomfort with her stories shows that I take myself too seriously. She frames my objections as a character flaw rather than a legitimate boundary. The most frustrating part is that Juliet genuinely seems to believe she's being a good friend by sharing these stories. She talks about them like she's celebrating our shared history and showing people how close we are. She can't or won't understand that there's a difference between laughing about embarrassing moments privately and using those moments to entertain strangers at my expense. I've started to realize that Juliet uses my embarrassing stories as a form of social currency. When she's in a group of people she doesn't know well, she can immediately become the center of attention by telling a funny story about someone else's misfortune. It's easier than trying to be interesting or entertaining based on her own experiences. The worst part is that these stories stick with people. Months later, I'll run into someone who was at one of those parties, and they'll bring up whatever embarrassing thing Juliet told them about me. What should have been forgotten moments from my past become defining characteristics that follow me around in my social circles. I've tried limiting how much personal information I share with Juliet, but we've been friends for so long that she has years' worth of embarrassing stories stored up. I've also tried asking her directly not to tell certain stories, but she either forgets or decides that my request doesn't apply to whatever specific situation we're in. The friendship has become stressful because I never know when Juliet is going to decide that the conversation needs to be livened up with an embarrassing story about me. What should be fun social situations have turned into potential minefields where I'm constantly worried about being humiliated in front of people I'm trying to impress. That story ends there. Using someone's embarrassing moments as party entertainment isn't friendship, it's emotional parasitism. The fact that she frames public humiliation as celebrating their closeness while refusing to stop when asked shows exactly how much respect she has for boundaries. Our next story comes from someone who learned that sharing gaming systems requires more trust than they realized. My brother always uses my gaming console without asking. Hugo and I both live at home while we're finishing college, and we share a lot of common spaces in the house, but my gaming setup in the living room has always been understood to be mine. I bought the console with money from my part-time job, I pay for the online subscriptions, and I've spent years building up my game library and save files. Hugo has his own laptop for gaming and usually sticks to PC games, but lately he's been gravitating toward my console more and more. At first it was just occasional use when I wasn't home, which I didn't mind, but over the past few months it's escalated into him treating my gaming system like it's community property. The first real issue came when I got home from work one evening and found Hugo deep into a game that I'd been playing. Not just any game, but a single-player RPG that I'd been working on for weeks. I'd put dozens of hours into building my character, exploring the world, and following complex storylines that required careful decision-making. When I walked into the living room, Hugo was controlling my character in the middle of what looked like an important story sequence. He'd clearly been playing for hours, and I could see that my character was in a completely different location than where I'd left off. He'd progressed through sections of the game that I'd been looking forward to experiencing myself. I asked Hugo what he was doing, and he casually said he'd gotten bored with his own games and decided to see what I'd been playing. He acted like it was no big deal, like borrowing someone's saved game file was the same as borrowing a book or a movie. He couldn't understand why I was upset about him playing my character. The problem wasn't just that he'd used my console without asking, he'd made irreversible progress in a story-driven game that I'd been carefully working through. Characters had been killed, plot decisions had been made, entire quest lines had been completed. All the choices that make these games personal and meaningful had been taken away from me. When I tried to explain this to Hugo, He suggested I could just start a new game file if I wanted to experience those parts myself. He didn't seem to grasp that starting over would mean losing weeks of progress and having to replay dozens of hours of content I'd already completed. The save file represented time and emotional investment that couldn't just be recreated. The situation got worse when I discovered that Hugo had been logging into my online gaming account and playing multiplayer games under my username. My friends list was confused about why I'd been online at times when I wasn't home, and my gaming statistics had been altered by someone else's playstyle and skill level. Hugo had also spent some of my in-game currency on cosmetic items that I would never have chosen. These were limited time purchases that couldn't be undone, and he'd used virtual money that I'd earned through hours of gameplay to buy things that didn't match my preferences at all. When I confronted him about the online account usage, Hugo said he didn't think it mattered, since it was just a game. He couldn't understand the difference between borrowing my console and actively impersonating me in online spaces where I'd built relationships and a reputation with other players. The most frustrating incident happened last week, when I came home to find Hugo in the middle of deleting some of my saved games to make space for new ones he wanted to download. He was casually browsing through my game library, deciding which of my save files were worth keeping and which ones could be deleted. Some of those save files represented games I'd completed months or even years ago, but that I kept for sentimental reasons or in case I wanted to revisit them. Others were games I'd put on hold temporarily, but planned to return to eventually. Hugo was making permanent decisions about my gaming library without any consideration for what those files meant to me. When I stopped him and asked what he thought he was doing, Hugo said the console was running out of storage space and something had to be deleted. He'd decided that old save files I wasn't actively playing were the logical choice, and he couldn't understand why I'd want to keep completed games on the system. I tried explaining that gaming save files aren't just functional data, they're memories and achievements that represent time I'd invested in those virtual worlds. Deleting someone else's save files is like throwing away their photo albums or erasing their personal history, but Hugo just saw them as digital clutter taking up space. The breaking point came when I realised Hugo had been inviting friends over to play multiplayer games on my console while I was at work. Not only was he using my gaming system without permission, but he was sharing it with other people who I didn't necessarily trust to handle my equipment carefully. I came home one day to find pizza grease on my controllers, empty soda cans stacked on my console, and unfamiliar user profiles created on my system. Hugo had essentially turned my gaming setup into a hangout spot for his friend group, complete with snacks and drinks that could damage expensive electronic equipment. When I asked Hugo about having friends over to use my stuff, he said he didn't think it was a big deal since out that I wasn't home anyway. So it wasn't they were just playing games. He pointed like I was being inconvenienced by their presence. He genuinely couldn't see the problem with letting other people use my belongings without asking. I've tried setting boundaries with Hugo about gaming console usage, but he seems to think that because we're brothers, and because the console is in a common area of the house, it's somehow partially his. He'll agree to ask before using it, but then he'll find loopholes like, "You weren't home, so I couldn't ask," or "It was just for a few minutes." The most recent incident involved Hugo downloading a game that I'd specifically said I was planning to buy and play myself. When I mentioned that I'd been waiting for this particular game to go on sale, Hugo took that as a suggestion to download it immediately and start playing. By the time I got the money together to purchase it, he'd already spoiled major plot points and ruined the experience for me. Hugo's defense is always that sharing is caring and that I'm being selfish by wanting to keep my console to myself. He acts like my attachment to my gaming progress and save files is childish, and that I should be happy to share my hobby with him, even if it means sacrificing my own gaming experience. The whole situation has made me realise that some people don't understand the personal investment that goes into gaming. To Hugo, games are just entertainment that can be shared interchangeably between people. To me, their personal journeys, and achievements that can't be replicated once they've been disrupted by someone else's involvement. I'm seriously considering moving my gaming setup to my bedroom, even though that means giving up the big TV and comfortable seating in the living room. But at this point, protecting my gaming experience seems more important than having the ideal setup if it means Hugo can't respect the boundaries around something that belongs to me. That story's over. Using someone's save files is like reading ahead in their personal diary and then acting confused about why they're upset. The casual deletion of gaming progress shows a complete lack of understanding about what those virtual achievements represent to the person who earned them. Moving on to someone who learned that some friends think reliability is optional when it comes to major favors. My friend promised to help me move, but never showed up. This happened 3 weeks ago when I was relocating to a new apartment across town. Leah had enthusiastically volunteered to help me with the move, and I'd been counting on her assistance because moving is genuinely impossible to do alone with any reasonable level of efficiency or safety. I'd been planning this move for about 2 months, and Leah knew all the details. We talked about it extensively. She'd seen the new place, and she'd specifically offered her help when I mentioned how stressed I was about coordinating everything. She said she had experience with moves, and that she actually enjoyed the process of organising and packing. The week before the move, I confirmed all the details with Leah. We agreed that she'd come over at 8 a.m. to help me finish packing the last few boxes and loading everything into the rental truck I'd reserved. She seemed excited about it, and even suggested we grab breakfast together beforehand to fuel up for the day of physical labour. I spent the entire week leading up to the move, preparing everything with Leah's help in mind. I'd organised boxes in a way that would be manageable for 2 people to carry. I'd planned the loading sequence for the truck based on having an extra pair of hands. I'd even bought extra food and drinks to keep us energised throughout the day. The night before the move, I texted Leah to confirm the timing and ask if she needed me to pick her up or if she had transportation to my place. She responded enthusiastically, saying she was all set and looking forward to helping me start this new chapter of my life. She even asked if there was anything specific she should bring or wear. Moving day arrived, and I was up early getting everything ready. I had boxes staged by the door, furniture pieces prepared for disassembly, and cleaning supplies ready for the final cleanup of my old place. At 7:45 a.m, I was watching for Leah to arrive, feeling grateful to have such a reliable friend willing to sacrifice her Saturday for my benefit. 8 a.m. came and went. Then 8:30, I texted Leah asking if she was running late or if she needed directions to my place. No response. I tried calling around 9 a.m, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message asking her to call me back and let me know what was happening. By 9:30, I was starting to panic. The rental truck was costing me by the hour. I had to be out of my old apartment by evening, and I was facing the prospect of doing a full apartment move completely by myself. I kept checking my phone, hoping for some explanation or at least confirmation that Leah was okay. At 10 a.m, I made the decision to start loading the truck myself rather than waiting any longer. It was physically exhausting and logistically challenging, but I didn't have a choice. I had to carry heavy furniture pieces by myself, make multiple trips for things that should have been 2-person jobs, and constantly worry about damaging my belongings or injuring myself. The move that should have taken us 4 or 5 hours together ended up taking me almost 10 hours working alone. I had to take frequent breaks, ask random neighbours for help with the heaviest items, and make difficult decisions about what I could realistically transport versus what I'd have to leave behind. Around 2 p.m, while I was struggling to get my couch into the truck by myself, I decided to check social media to see if there was any indication of what had happened to Leah. What I found made my blood boil. Leah had been posting Instagram stories throughout the morning, showing herself at brunch with friends, then shopping at the mall, then getting her nails done. She was clearly fine, clearly had her phone with her, and clearly had completely forgotten about her commitment to help me move. While I was sweating and struggling with boxes and furniture, she was having a leisurely Saturday, of self-care and socializing. Posting happy photos like she didn't have a care in the world. I screenshot her Instagram stories and sent them to her with a message asking what was going on and why she hadn't shown up or even called to cancel. Still no response. I was furious, exhausted, and feeling completely abandoned by someone I'd trusted to be there for me during a stressful life transition. It wasn't until Sunday evening, more than 24 hours after she was supposed to help me move, that Leah finally responded to my messages. Her text just said, "OMG, I totally forgot about your move. I'm so sorry, how did it go?" Like forgetting to help someone relocate their entire life was the same as forgetting to return a phone call. When I explained how difficult and exhausting it had been to move everything by myself, and how hurt I was that she'd ghosted me all day while posting on social media, Leah's response was defensive. She said that everyone forgets things sometimes, that I should have called her earlier to remind her, and that I was being dramatic about the whole situation. She suggested that I could have hired professional movers if I really needed help, completely missing the point that she'd volunteered and that I'd planned my entire moving strategy around having her assistance. She acted like her failure to show up was just a minor inconvenience rather than a major betrayal of trust. The most infuriating part of Leah's response was when she said she felt bad about forgetting, but that I shouldn't take it so personally because it wasn't intentional. She couldn't understand that the impact of her actions wasn't lessened by the fact that she hadn't meant to hurt me. When I pointed out that she'd been active on social media all day and could have easily checked her messages or remembered her commitment, Leah got even more defensive. She said I was being controlling by monitoring her social media activity and that her Saturday plans shouldn't be dictated by other people's expectations. Since the move, our friendship has been strained. I've realised that I can't depend on Leah for anything important, and she seems confused about why I'm less enthusiastic about making plans with her. She acts like the moving incident was just a one-time mistake that I should forgive and forget. The whole experience taught me that some people see commitments as suggestions rather than obligations. When Leah offered to help me move, I heard a promise. When she forgot about it, she saw it as an unfortunate scheduling mix-up. The difference in how we viewed that commitment says everything about our different approaches to friendship and reliability. I'm still dealing with the physical and financial consequences of having to move by myself. I injured my back lifting heavy items alone, and I had to pay extra fees for the rental truck because the move took so much longer than planned. But the emotional betrayal of being abandoned by someone I trusted has been harder to recover from than the physical challenges. That story is over. Getting brunch selfies posted while your friend is carrying a couch up 3 flights of stairs alone is friendship betrayal at its finest. The casual "how did it go?" follow-up like she forgot a coffee date instead of a major life event is just spectacular levels of self-absorption. Let's hear from someone who discovered that sharing romantic meals requires more attention than their partner was willing to give. My partner spends hours on their phone when we're together. Samir and I have been dating for about 7 months, and what started as occasional phone checking has evolved into him being more engaged with his screen than with me during almost every moment we spend together. At first, I thought it was just work-related. Samir has a job that requires him to be responsive to emails and messages, so when we'd be watching a movie and he'd check his phone, I assumed it was something important he needed to handle quickly. I'm understanding about work obligations and the reality of modern communication demands, but I started noticing that the phone usage wasn't limited to work hours or urgent situations. Samir would be scrolling through social media while we were having dinner conversations, responding to group chats while we were supposed to be spending quality time together, and watching TikTok videos while I was trying to tell him about my day. The pattern became most obvious during our date nights. We'd go to a nice restaurant, somewhere we'd both been looking forward to trying, and Samir would spend the entire meal divided between me and his phone. He'd ask me a question about my day, then immediately start reading something on his screen while I was answering. It's incredibly frustrating to be in the middle of telling someone a story or sharing something important, only to realize they're not actually listening because they're focused on whatever notification just came through. I'd pause mid-sentence and Samir would look up and ask me to continue, completely unaware that he'd tuned out. The worst incident happened during a dinner I'd planned for our 6-month anniversary. I'd made reservations at this restaurant we'd both wanted to try, dressed up nicely, and was excited to have a romantic evening together. We'd both been busy with work lately, so this felt like an important opportunity to reconnect. From the moment we sat down, Samir's phone was on the table next to his plate. Every few minutes, it would buzz with a notification, and he'd immediately pick it up to check what it was. Sometimes he'd just glance at it, but other times he'd start typing responses or scrolling through whatever app had captured his attention. I tried making conversation about the menu, about the restaurant's atmosphere, about things happening in our lives, but Samir's responses were distracted and minimal. He'd give me half his attention, while the other half remained focused on his phone screen, like he was monitoring it for something more interesting than our conversation. The breaking point came when I was telling him about a difficult situation at work that had been stressing me out all week. It was something I'd been looking forward to discussing with him, wanting his perspective and support. Midway through explaining the situation, I noticed Samir was watching a video on his phone, earbuds in one ear. I stopped talking and just looked at him. It took him almost 30 seconds to realise I'd gone silent. When he finally looked up, he asked, "What's wrong?" Like my stopping mid-conversation was the problem, not his complete lack of attention to what I was saying. When I pointed out that he'd been watching videos while I was trying to talk to him about something important, Samir got defensive. He said he was multitasking and that he could listen to me and check his phone at the same time. He insisted that he'd heard everything I'd said, but when I asked him to repeat it, he couldn't. Samir's justification was that his generation grew up with technology and that he was better at multitasking than I gave him credit for. He said that being on his phone didn't mean he cared less about me or our relationship. It was just how he stayed connected to the world around him. But I wasn't asking him to disconnect from the world entirely. I was asking for his full attention during the time we'd specifically set aside to be together. When we're on a date or having a serious conversation, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that his primary focus should be on me, rather than on social media or group chats. The phone usage has started affecting our physical intimacy too. Samir will be checking messages right up until we start being intimate, and sometimes even immediately afterward. It makes me feel like I'm competing with his phone for his attention, like I'm just another notification vying for his focus. I've tried talking to Samir about establishing phone-free zones or times when we both put our devices away and focus on each other. He agrees in principle, but in practice, he can't seem to resist checking his phone even during our designated quality time together. The most frustrating part is that Samir doesn't seem to understand why his phone usage bothers me. He sees it as normal behaviour, the way everyone interacts with technology in modern relationships. He can't grasp that constantly dividing his attention between me and his screen makes me feel unimportant and undervalued. Last week, I experimented with using my phone the same way Samir does during our time together. I started checking social media while he was talking, responding to texts during our conversations, and generally giving him the same level of divided attention he gives me. He noticed immediately and asked me to put my phone away because it was rude. When I pointed out that this was exactly what he does to me regularly, Samir said it was different because his phone usage was just natural, while mine felt intentional and spiteful. He couldn't see the double standard in his reaction or understand that my behaviour was just a mirror of his own habits. The phone issue has become a symbol of deeper problems in our relationship. It's not really about the device itself, it's about feeling like I don't have Samir's full presence or attention, even when we're physically together. It's about feeling like our relationship has to compete with every app, notification, and piece of digital content for his focus. I'm starting to question whether Samir is capable of the kind of present, attentive connection that I need in a relationship. If he can't put his phone down for a 2-hour dinner date, how can I expect him to be fully present for bigger moments or more serious conversations in our future together? That story is over. Nothing says romance like competing with TikTok for your partner's attention during anniversary dinner. The fact that he immediately noticed when she mirrored his behaviour but couldn't see the problem when he was doing it shows exactly how little self-awareness he has. Our next story comes from someone who learned that family members can be surprisingly cruel about other people's career choices. My cousin always makes jokes about my job. Owen and I see each other pretty regularly at family gatherings, and he's developed this habit of making condescending comments about my work that he frames as harmless teasing. But his jokes have become increasingly hurtful and embarrassing, especially when he makes them in front of other family members. I work as a freelance graphic designer, which means I create visual content for various clients, manage my own schedule, and work primarily from home. It's taken me years to build up a steady client base, and while the income can be inconsistent, I genuinely love what I do, and I'm good at it. Owen works in finance at a large corporation, and he seems to think that his traditional office job makes him an expert on what constitutes real work. Every time someone asks about my job at family events, Owen jumps in with comments about how nice it must be to play with pictures all day, or how lucky I am to have such an easy job. The comments started small, just little digs about my work from home situation. Owen would make jokes about how I probably spent all day in my pajamas or how I got to sleep in while everyone else was commuting to real jobs. At first I laughed along because I thought he was just being playful, and some of his observations weren't entirely wrong. But the comments have gotten more pointed and dismissive over time. Now Owen regularly refers to my work as playing on the computer or making pretty pictures. He'll ask if I've gotten any real jobs lately, or suggest that maybe I should consider finding adult work instead of doing what he calls hobby projects. The most hurtful incident happened at my grandmother's birthday party last month. Several family members were asking about my recent projects, and I was excitedly describing a branding campaign I'd created for a local business. I was proud of the work and happy to share how the campaign had helped increase their customer engagement. Owen interrupted my explanation to tell everyone that I was basically just playing with fonts and colours, and that anyone could do what I do with the right computer program. He said it wasn't like real business work that required actual skills and education. The dismissive way he said it made me feel small and foolish for being excited about my accomplishments. When I tried to explain that graphic design involves understanding psychology, marketing principles, and complex technical skills, Owen laughed and said I was being defensive about my art projects. He told the family that I was trying to make my work sound more complicated than it actually was to justify calling it a real job. The conversation became even more uncomfortable when Owen started talking about how much money he makes in finance, comparing his salary to what he assumed I earned as a freelancer. He made it clear that he considered his work more valuable and legitimate because it paid better and involved working in a traditional office environment. What makes Owen's comments particularly frustrating is that he has no understanding of what my job actually involves. He sees the final products I create and assumes that's all there is to it, without considering the research, planning, client communication, and technical expertise that goes into every project. Graphic design isn't just about making things look pretty. It requires understanding target audiences, analysing market trends, solving visual communication problems, and translating complex ideas into accessible visual formats. But Owen reduces all of that to playing with pictures, because it doesn't fit his narrow definition of professional work. The jokes have started affecting how other family members view my career. I've noticed that people are less likely to ask about my work, or seem less impressed when I share professional accomplishments. Owen's constant dismissal has made my job seem trivial and unimportant to people who don't understand what it involves. Last Christmas, Owen made a comment about how I should consider getting a grown-up job before I got too old to start a real career. He said this in front of my parents, who have always been supportive of my work, and I could see them looking uncomfortable and unsure how to respond. When I confronted Owen privately about his comments, he acted like I was overreacting to harmless teasing between cousins. He said he was just joking around and that I shouldn't take his comments so seriously. He claimed that if I was confident in my career choice, his opinions shouldn't bother me. But Owen's jokes aren't harmless. They're designed to undermine my professional credibility and make me feel insecure about my career path. They reflect his genuine belief that creative work is less valuable and legitimate than traditional corporate jobs, and he uses humour as a way to express that prejudice. The most recent incident happened at a family barbecue where Owen loudly announced that I was still playing artist instead of getting a real job like everyone else. He said it in front of my teenage cousins who are starting to think about their own career paths, and I worried about what message his dismissiveness was sending them about creative professions. I've tried explaining to Owen that creative industries are legitimate business sectors that contribute significantly to the economy, but he dismisses any evidence that contradicts his preconceptions. He seems to think that unless work involves sitting in an office wearing a suit, it's not worthy of respect or recognition. The situation has made me dread family gatherings because I know Owen will find a way to make disparaging comments about my work. What should be celebrations and opportunities to catch up with family have become situations where I feel like I have to defend my career choices and professional accomplishments. Owen's attitude represents a broader cultural prejudice against creative work that treats artistic and design professions as hobbies rather than legitimate career paths. His comments hurt not just because they're personally dismissive, but because they reflect society's tendency to devalue creative labour and the people who do it. That story is over. Imagine being so insecure about your own career that you have to constantly belittle someone else's creative work to feel important. The playing with pictures dismissal shows exactly how little Owen understands about visual communication and problem solving in design. Moving on to someone who's solving. Some people really think creativity isn't real work because they've never had an original idea in their lives. Moving on to someone who discovered that some friends think spoilers are the ultimate form of entertainment. My friend spoiled the ending of my favourite show just to annoy me. Clara has always been the type of person who finds other people's reactions amusing, but what she did last week crossed the line from playful teasing into genuine cruelty. I'd been watching this mystery series for months, carefully avoiding spoilers and getting deeply invested in the complex storyline. The show was this intricate psychological thriller with multiple timelines and unreliable narrators. Every episode revealed new clues and raised new questions, and I'd become completely obsessed with trying to figure out the mystery before the final reveal. I've been discussing theories with friends, analysing every detail, and genuinely enjoying the experience of being surprised by each plot twist. Clara knew how much I loved this show because I'd been talking about it for weeks. I'd shared my theories with her, gotten excited about particularly good episodes, and mentioned several times how careful I was being to avoid spoilers online. She'd seemed interested in my enthusiasm and had even asked thoughtful questions about the characters and plot. I was finally on the last episode of the series, the one I'd been building up to for months. I'd planned a whole evening around it, ordered my favourite takeout, turned off my phone to avoid distractions, and settled in to finally learn the solution to the mystery that had been consuming my thoughts for weeks. Right before I started the episode, Clara texted me, asking what I was doing. I responded that I was about to watch the series finale and that I was excited to finally get answers to all the questions that had been driving me crazy. She seemed excited for me and said she hoped I enjoyed the conclusion. About 20 minutes into the episode, just as the big reveal was starting to unfold, I heard Clara shouting from across the apartment courtyard. We live in the same complex, and our windows face each other, so sound carries pretty easily between our units when they're open. Clara was yelling the ending of the show at the top of her lungs, spoiling not just who the killer was, but also explaining the entire twist ending and how all the mysteries connected together. She was loud enough that I could hear every word clearly, and detailed enough that there was no ambiguity about what she was revealing. I was frozen in shock for a moment, unable to process that Clara would deliberately ruin something she knew I'd been looking forward to for months. The revelation she'd shouted was exactly what the show was building toward in that very moment, and she'd destroyed the entire experience of discovery and surprise. I paused the episode and immediately called Clara to ask what she thought she was doing. She was laughing when she answered the phone, clearly delighted with her prank. She said she thought it would be funny to see my reaction to finding out the ending early, and that she'd been planning to do it ever since I'd mentioned watching the finale. When I told Clara how hurt and angry I was, she acted like I was overreacting to a harmless joke. She said it was just a TV show, and that I could still watch the episode even if I knew how it ended. She couldn't understand why spoiling the mystery would ruin the experience, since all the same content was still there to be watched. I tried explaining that mystery shows are specifically designed around the experience of not knowing the solution. The entire point is the gradual revelation of clues and the surprise of the final twist. Once you know the ending, you can't unknow it, and the intended viewing experience is permanently destroyed. Clara's response was that she thought I'd find it funny once I got over the initial surprise. She claimed she was just trying to be playful, and that I should appreciate her spontaneous sense of humour, rather than getting upset about something that didn't really matter. But it did matter to me. I'd invested months of emotional energy in following this story, and Clara had deliberately destroyed the culmination of that experience for her own amusement. She'd taken something I cared about and used it as material for a prank that benefited no one except her desire to get a reaction. The worst part was that Clara had clearly planned this spoiler attack. She'd asked what I was doing specifically so she could time her shouting to ruin the most important moment of the episode. This wasn't a spontaneous slip of the tongue or an accidental revelation. It was a calculated attempt to destroy my enjoyment. When I finished watching the episode, it was completely hollow. Every plot revelation felt anticlimactic because I already knew what was coming. The carefully constructed mystery that should have been satisfying to solve felt pointless because the solution had been handed to me in the worst possible way. I've tried to explain to Clara why what she did was so hurtful, but she continues to treat it like a minor prank that I'm taking too seriously. She's even made jokes about spoiling other shows for me in the future, like the threat of ruining my entertainment is somehow funny rather than cruel. The incident has made me much more cautious about sharing my interests and enthusiasm with Clara. If she's willing to deliberately destroy something I care about just to get a laugh, then I can't trust her with information about things that are important to me. What bothers me most is that Clara seems to genuinely believe that her moment of amusement was worth ruining hours of my enjoyment. She values her own entertainment over my experience, and she can't understand why that's a problem for our friendship. The spoiler incident has become a symbol of how Clara approaches our relationship in general. She's willing to sacrifice my happiness for her own fun, and she expects me to be okay with that because she frames it as playful rather than malicious. But the impact is the same regardless of her intentions. I've started being much more private about shows and books I'm enjoying, because I've learned that Clara will use my interests against me if she thinks it will create an amusing situation for her. What should be shared enthusiasm between friends has become something I have to guard against potential sabotage. That story is over. Deliberately shouting spoilers across a courtyard requires a special kind of calculated cruelty disguised as humour. The months of planning and emotional investment destroyed in one moment of someone else's entertainment shows exactly how little Clara values other people's happiness compared to her own amusement. Let's hear from someone who learned that some siblings think imitation is the sincerest form of identity theft. My sister tries to copy my hairstyle every time. This has been an ongoing issue for the past 2 years, ever since Elias started paying more attention to fashion and personal style. What began as occasional similarities in our appearance has evolved into systematic copying that makes me feel like I can't have anything that's uniquely mine. Elias and I are both in our 20s and we've always had different personal styles. I tend to be more experimental with my looks, trying new hairstyles and fashion choices that reflect my personality and mood. Elias used to be more conservative with her appearance, sticking to basic styles that were safe and conventional. About 2 years ago, I decided to get a dramatic haircut that I'd been thinking about for months. I went from long, straight hair to a shoulder-length bob with subtle layers. It was a big change for me, and I loved how it looked. The style felt fresh and modern, and it suited my face shape perfectly. I got tons of compliments on the new haircut, and I felt really confident and happy with the change. For about a week, I enjoyed having this new look that felt uniquely mine. Then Elias showed up at a family dinner with almost the exact same haircut. Not just similar, but virtually identical. The same length, the same layering, even the same way of styling it with a slight wave. When I asked Elias about her sudden hair transformation, she claimed it was just a coincidence and that she'd been planning to get a bob for months, but hadn't mentioned it to anyone. I found that hard to believe, given that Elias had never expressed any interest in shorter hairstyles before, and the timing seemed too convenient to be accidental. But I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt and figured that maybe we'd just happened to choose similar styles independently. A few months later, I decided to try something completely different. I went to a salon and got highlights added to my hair, creating a subtle ombre effect that transitioned from darker roots to lighter ends. It was a more adventurous look than I'd ever tried before, and I was excited about the change. Again, I received compliments and felt great about my new appearance. And again, within 2 weeks, Elias showed up with the exact same highlighting pattern. Same placement, same colours, same technique. This time, when I confronted her about the copying, she got defensive. Elias claimed that she'd gotten the inspiration for her highlights from a magazine, not from copying me. She said that just because I'd gotten similar work done recently didn't mean she wasn't allowed to try the same style. She acted like I was being possessive about hair colours that anyone could choose. But it wasn't about owning particular hairstyles or colours. It was about the pattern of Elias systematically replicating every change I made to my appearance within days or weeks of me making it. The timing and specificity made it clear that she was copying me rather than developing her own sense of style. The most obvious incident happened when I decided to try bangs for the first time in my adult life. I'd been researching different bang styles for weeks, looking at photos and consulting with my stylist about what would work best with my face shape and hair texture. I finally settled on side-swept bangs that complemented my existing cut perfectly. The stylist did an amazing job, and I felt like the bangs completed my look in a way that felt sophisticated and intentional. I was really proud of the choice and excited to have tried something new. Less than a week later, Elias got the exact same bangs. Not just similar bangs, but identical ones. Same length, same angle, same styling method. When family members commented on how similar we looked, Elias acted like it was just a funny coincidence rather than obvious copying. When I asked Elias directly why she kept getting the same hairstyles as me, she became defensive and accusatory. She said I was being narcissistic to think that her hair choices had anything to do with me, and that I didn't own particular hairstyles just because I'd tried them first. She also accused me of being jealous that the styles looked better on her than they did on me, which was particularly hurtful because it suggested that she was deliberately competing with me rather than just appreciating the same aesthetics. The copying has extended beyond just replicating my existing hairstyles to predicting and intercepting styles I'm considering. Elias has started following my stylist on social media and paying attention to photos I save or share online. then getting similar work done before I have a chance to try it myself. Last month I was researching curtain bangs and had saved several reference photos on my phone. Before I could even book an appointment to try the style, Elias showed up with perfect curtain bangs, claiming she'd just spontaneously decided to try something new. The most frustrating part is that Elias receives compliments for her style choices, while I feel like I can't enjoy the uniqueness of my own appearance because she's always just a few days behind me with identical modifications. It's gotten to the point where I've started being secretive about my hair appointments and style plans because I know that anything I try will be copied within weeks. I'll research styles privately and avoid mentioning my ideas to family members because I've learned that information somehow makes its way to Elias. The copying has affected my relationship with experimenting with my appearance. Instead of feeling excited about trying new styles, I feel anxious about whether Elias will replicate whatever I choose. It's made something that should be fun and personal feel competitive and stressful. When I've tried to talk to other family members about the situation, they tend to dismiss it as sibling rivalry or suggest that I should be flattered that Elias likes my style choices enough to copy them. But it doesn't feel flattering, it feels like identity theft. The worst part is that Elias has never acknowledged the copying pattern or shown any interest in developing her own distinct sense of style. She seems content to let me do the research and experimentation, then replicate my choices without any of the thought or risk that goes into trying something new. I've started considering more dramatic style changes that would be harder for Elias to copy quickly, but I hate that her behaviour is influencing my personal choices. I should be able to style my hair based on what I like and what suits me, not based on what will be difficult for my sister to replicate. That story is over. Having your own sister turn into your personal style stalker is like living with a mirror that's always 1 week behind. The fact that she won't even admit to the copying while doing it, so obviously makes the whole situation even more maddening. Our next story involves someone who learned that certain partners think commitment applies differently, depending on who's breaking plans. My partner cancels plans last minute, but gets mad if I do the same. Kai and I have been together for about a year, and this double standard has become one of the most frustrating patterns in our relationship. They seem to believe that their schedule changes are always justified emergencies, while mine are just selfish excuses. The pattern started early in our relationship, when Kai began cancelling our dinner plans about an hour before we were supposed to meet. They called and explained that their co-worker needed help with a project, and they felt obligated to stay late. I was disappointed because I'd been looking forward to trying this new restaurant together, but I understood that work emergencies happen sometimes. The cancellation became a regular occurrence. Kai would text me 30 minutes before we were supposed to meet for coffee, saying their friend was having a crisis and needed emotional support. Or they'd call while I was getting ready for a movie, explaining that their family had made last-minute plans that they couldn't get out of. I started to notice that Kai's emergencies always seemed to involve other people needing them urgently. Their friend was having relationship drama, their mum needed help with something at the house, their co-worker was stressed about a deadline. Kai always positioned themselves as the only person who could solve these problems, making their cancellations seem selfless and necessary. What made it more frustrating was how Kai would apologise profusely and promise to make it up to me. They'd suggest rescheduling for later in the week and would seem genuinely sorry about disappointing me. I'd feel bad for being upset because their reasons always sounded legitimate and caring. But then something happened that completely changed my perspective on Kai's cancellation habits. 3 months ago, I had to cancel our weekend plans because I came down with a stomach bug. I was genuinely sick, throwing up, and feeling awful, and I called Kai on Friday night to explain that I wouldn't be able to go hiking with them on Saturday morning. Kai's reaction was immediate and harsh. They accused me of being inconsiderate and unreliable. They said they'd been looking forward to our hike all week, and that I should have taken better care of myself if I knew we had plans. They made me feel guilty for getting sick, like it was something I'd done intentionally to ruin their weekend. When I pointed out that Kai cancelled our plans regularly for much less serious reasons, they got defensive. They insisted that their cancellations were always for important reasons that I should understand, while mine was just poor planning on my part. They couldn't see the hypocrisy in their reaction. The double standard became even more obvious a few weeks later when I had to cancel a dinner date because my grandmother was in the hospital. My family needed me to help coordinate some medical decisions, and I felt obligated to be there for such an important situation. Kai was furious that I was prioritizing family over our relationship. They said that I was using my grandmother's situation as an excuse to avoid spending time with them, and that I could have handled family responsibilities after our dinner instead of cancelling altogether. But when Kai cancelled our plans the following week to help their friend move apartments, they expected complete understanding and support. They couldn't see that both situations involved family obligations, and that my grandmother's medical emergency was actually more urgent than their friend's moving schedule. I started keeping track of how often each of us cancelled plans. Over the course of 2 months, Kai cancelled 7 different dates or activities we'd planned together. I cancelled twice, once for being sick and once for the family emergency. But somehow, in Kai's mind, I was the unreliable partner. The most recent incident happened when I had to cancel our movie night because I got called in to cover an extra shift at work. The person who was supposed to work had a family emergency, and my manager needed someone to fill in immediately. It was short notice, but it was also an opportunity to earn extra money that I really needed. Kai accused me of caring more about money than our relationship. They said that I should have told my manager no, and that missing one shift wouldn't have made a difference financially. They made it sound like I was choosing work over them deliberately, rather than responding to an unexpected situation. But just 2 days later, Kai cancelled our dinner plans because their friend wanted to go see a band that was playing downtown. Not an emergency, not an obligation, just something fun that came up at the last minute. When I expressed disappointment, Kai told me I should be more flexible and understanding about spontaneous opportunities. The conversation that followed revealed how differently Kai viewed our respective cancellations. In their mind, their reasons were always valid because they involved helping other people or taking advantage of unique opportunities. My reasons were selfish because they involved personal needs like health, family, or financial responsibilities. Our next story comes from someone who's been slowly disappearing from their own friendships. My friend always talks about themselves and never asks about me. I've been friends with Iris for about 3 years now, and I'm starting to realise something that's been bothering me for months. Every single conversation we have revolves entirely around her life, her problems, her job, her relationships, her family drama, everything. At first I didn't really notice it because she's naturally talkative, and I'm more of a listener anyway. I figured that's just how our dynamic worked. She'd tell me about whatever was happening in her world, and I'd give advice or just be there to support her through whatever crisis she was dealing with that week. But lately, I've been paying attention to how our conversations actually flow, and it's honestly depressing. We'll talk for an hour, sometimes 2 hours, and she'll spend the entire time updating me on every detail of her life. Her co-worker who's annoying her, her dating situation, her family issues, her apartment problems, her health concerns. She goes deep into every topic, expecting me to remember details from previous conversations and follow up on things she's mentioned before. The thing is, I do remember. I care about what's happening in her life, so I ask follow-up questions and give thoughtful responses. I remember that her boss has been giving her a hard time about her schedule. I remember that she's been having issues with her upstairs neighbour. I remember that she's been trying to decide whether to adopt a cat. I engage with all of it because that's what friends do. But here's what's been eating at me. In 3 years of friendship, I can count on one hand the number of times Iris has asked me a personal question about my own life. Not just the polite, "How are you?" that people say automatically, but actual curiosity about what's going on with me. I started testing this theory about 6 months ago. I stopped volunteering information about myself to see if she'd notice or ask. The results were exactly what I expected, and somehow still disappointing. I got a promotion at work that I was really excited about, something I'd been working toward for over a year. I didn't mention it during our usual phone call, waiting to see if she'd ask about work or notice that I seemed happy about something. She spent 45 minutes telling me about a fight she'd had with her sister, then said she had to go. No questions about my day, my week, my life. I started dating someone new, which was a big deal for me because I'd been single for almost 2 years after a pretty rough breakup. I was nervous and excited and wanted to talk to my friend about it. But again, I waited to see if she'd ask. 3 conversations later, still nothing. She was too busy analysing every text message her own dating situation was sending her. My grandmother passed away last month. This was someone who basically raised me after my parents divorced, someone incredibly important to my life. I was grieving and could have used support from my friends. During our next phone call, I waited for any opening to share what had happened. Iris talked for 1 hour and 20 minutes about her job interview process. At the end, she said, "Okay, I sure you go, but call me tomorrow if anything interesting happens." Anything interesting happens. My grandmother had died 4 days earlier. That's when I realised I'd become completely invisible in this friendship. I'm not a person to Iris. I'm an audience. I'm a free therapy session. I'm someone who listens and responds appropriately and remembers details, but I'm not someone whose own life matters enough to ask about. I've been pulling back from the friendship since then. Not answering her calls as quickly, keeping conversations shorter. Part of me wonders if she'll notice that I'm less available, if she'll ask what's wrong, or if everything's okay with me. But honestly, I'm not holding my breath. The worst part is that I don't think she's doing this maliciously. I don't think she's consciously deciding that her life is more important than mine. I think she's just so wrapped up in her own world that it genuinely doesn't occur to her that other people have inner lives worth exploring. I've thought about having a direct conversation with her about this, but I can already imagine how it would go. She'd probably get defensive, say that I never bring things up, so how was she supposed to know I wanted to talk about myself? Or she'd say that she thought I preferred listening, that she was just being herself, and didn't realise it was a problem. Maybe that's true. Maybe I've enabled this dynamic by being too good of a listener, by never demanding space for my own stories. But friendship shouldn't be more intuitive than that. Shouldn't someone ask about you naturally who want to know what's happening in your life? I'm starting to realise that some people are just takers in relationships. They'll absorb all the emotional energy and support you're willing to give, but they won't think to reciprocate unless you explicitly demand it. And by the time you're at the point of having to demand basic interest in your life, the friendship is already over. That story's over. The slow realization that you've become a supporting character in someone else's life story is brutal. When you have to test whether your friend actually cares about your existence, you already have your answer. Some people really do see relationships as one-person shows with an audience of one. Speaking of people who take things that aren't theirs, this next story is about someone who borrowed something precious and decided to make it their own. My cousin took my favourite book and never returned it. This happened about 8 months ago, but I'm still annoyed about it every time I think about wanting to reread that book. My cousin Jonah came to visit for a weekend, and while he was staying in my room, he noticed my bookshelf. I'm pretty protective of my books. I've been collecting them since I was a kid, and some of them have real sentimental value. There are mum books my read to me when I was little, books I bought with my own money when I first started working, books that got me through difficult times in my life. My bookshelf isn't just storage, it's like a personal history. Jonah was browsing through my collection and pulled out this one novel that's probably my favourite book of all time. I've read it at least 6 times over the years. It's this beautiful story about friendship and loss. And every time I read it, I discover something new. The copy I have is a hardcover first edition that I found at a used bookstore when I was 16. I saved up for weeks to buy it, and it's been with me through college, several moves, all the major transitions in my life. He asked if he could borrow it, said he'd heard good things about the author but had never read anything by them. I was hesitant because I don't usually lend out my favourite books, but he's family, and he promised he'd take good care of it and it'd soon return. That was 8 months ago. For the first few weeks, I didn't think much about it. People forget about borrowed books sometimes, and I figured he was just taking his time reading it. After about a month, I texted him asking how he was liking the book. He said he was enjoying it but was a slow reader and would get it back to me soon. 2 months later, I asked about it again. He said he'd finished it and loved it, and that he'd mail it back to me that week. The week came and went, no book. After 3 months, I started being more direct. I told him I wanted to reread the book and asked when I could expect it back. He said he'd been meaning to send it but kept forgetting, and that he'd definitely it in the mail soon. 4. I was months in, starting to get really frustrated. This wasn't just any book, it was my favourite book, and I was missing it. I called him instead of texting and explained how much the book meant to me. He apologised and said he understood completely, that he'd put it in the mail that very day. Still no book. At the 5-month mark, I started to suspect something was wrong. I asked him directly if he still had the book or if something had happened to it. He assured me he still had it and that he'd been having issues with his local post office, but that he'd drive to a different location and send it priority mail. By month 6, I was done being polite about it. I told him I was really upset that he'd had my book for half a year and that I needed it back immediately. I offered to pay for overnight shipping if money was the issue. He got defensive and said he didn't appreciate being hassled about it, that it was just a book and I was being dramatic. Just a book. Last month I found out what had really happened. My aunt mentioned in passing that she'd noticed Jonah had been reading a lot lately and that she was proud of him for getting back into books. She said he'd even started writing in the margins and taking notes, something he'd never done before, writing in the margins of my book. When I confronted him about this, he finally admitted the truth. He had been writing in the book, not just like pencil marks that could be erased, but pen. He'd underlined passages, written his thoughts in the margins, and apparently even signed his name on the inside cover because he wanted to remember when he read it. He'd turned my precious first edition into his personal journal without asking permission. When I demanded he return it immediately, regardless of its condition, he said he'd grown attached to it and asked if he could keep it. He offered to buy me a new copy, completely missing the point that this specific copy had sentimental value that couldn't be replaced. I told him absolutely not, that he'd already violated my trust by writing in it, and that the least he could do was return my property. He finally agreed but said he needed a few more days to finish his notes. When the book finally arrived last week, I almost cried looking at it. My beautiful, clean first edition was covered in his handwriting. Passages I'd loved were underlined in blue ink. The margins were filled with his thoughts and reactions. My name, which I'd written carefully in pencil on the first page years ago, was crossed out, and his name was written underneath in bold letters. He'd completely colonised my book. The worst part is that some of his notes were actually thoughtful and showed that he'd engaged deeply with the story. In another context, I might have enjoyed discussing his insights, but seeing them permanently marked all over my cherished copy felt like such a violation. I can still read the book, obviously, but it's not the same. Every page reminds me of how little respect he had for something that mattered to me. It's like he took a piece of my personal history and made it about himself. When I told him how upset I was about the condition it came back in, he said I was overreacting and that his notes actually improved the book because now it had more character. He suggested I should be grateful that he'd engaged so deeply with something I'd recommended. I don't think I'll ever lend him anything again, and I definitely don't think of him the same way. There's something about the casual way he damaged something precious to me that I can't get past. That story is over. The entitlement to literally rewrite someone else's treasured possession is staggering. Signing your name in someone else's book like you're claiming territory is the kind of boundary violation that reveals someone's true character. Some people really think other people's belongings exist for their personal use and improvement. Our next story takes us into the world of relationship dynamics and public humiliation. My partner made fun of my hobby in front of friends. I've been dating Clara for about 10 months now, and overall things have been really good between us. She's funny, smart, and we have a lot in common. But last weekend, something happened that I can't stop thinking about. I've been knitting for about 3 years now. I know it's not the most typical hobby for a 26-year-old guy, but I genuinely love it. There's something really meditative about the repetitive motions, and I like creating things with my hands. I've made scarves for family members, sweaters for myself, even a blanket that took me 8 months to finish. It's become a huge part of how I relax and unwind after stressful days at work. Clara has always known about my knitting. She's seen me working on projects while we watch movies together. She's even worn a hat I made for her during the winter. I thought she was supportive of it, or at least neutral about it. She'd never said anything negative before. Last Saturday, we went to a house party at her friend Madison's place. I didn't know most of the people there, but everyone seemed friendly enough. At some point during the evening, I was talking to a few people about weekend hobbies. Someone mentioned rock climbing, another person talked about their photography, and when they asked what I liked to do, I mentioned that I was really into knitting. The reaction was pretty much what I expected. A couple people seemed genuinely interested and asked what kinds of things I made. One woman said she'd always wanted to learn, but found it intimidating. Normal responses from people who aren't jerks about traditionally gendered activities. But then Clara jumped into the conversation in a way that completely blindsided me. "Oh my God, you should see him," she said, laughing. "He sits there for hours with these tiny needles, making the most serious face. It's like watching someone perform surgery, except he's making a pot holder or something." Everyone started laughing, and I could feel my face getting was and hot. Clara done. Last week I came home, and he was watching YouTube tutorials about different stitching techniques. He had this notebook where he was taking notes like he was studying for finals. I was like, "Honey, it's yarn, not rocket science." More laughter from the group. I tried to laugh along because I didn't want to seem like I couldn't take a joke, but inside I was mortified. Clara was describing my hobby like it was this ridiculous, overly serious obsession that she had to tolerate. "The best part," she continued, "is that he gets so frustrated when he makes mistakes. He'll undo hours of work because one stitch is off. I keep telling him no one's going to notice, but he's such a perfectionist about it. It's honestly kind of adorable how seriously he takes something so simple." By this point, I wanted to disappear. Clara was painting me as this obsessive weirdo who gets worked up over something she clearly thought was beneath serious attention. The way she was talking about me, like I was a child with a cute but ultimately meaningless hobby, was humiliating. I tried to steer the conversation away by asking someone else about their photography, but Clara had one more comment to make. "I keep threatening to hide his knitting needles, so he'll actually leave the house on weekends," she said. "Sometimes I think he loves that yarn more than he loves me." Everyone laughed again, but this time it felt different. Less like laughing with me and more like laughing at me. I excused myself to get another drink and spent the rest of the party avoiding that group of people. On the drive home, I was quiet. Clara asked if I was okay and I told her I was tired. I wasn't ready to have that conversation yet because I was still processing how betrayed I felt. The next day, I brought it up. I told Clara that her comments about my knitting had hurt my feelings and made me feel embarrassed in front of people I'd just met. Her reaction was not what I hoped for. "Come on, I was just joking around," she said. "Everyone, it was funny. You thought of being too sensitive." I tried to explain that even if she meant it as a joke, it felt like she was mocking something that was important to me, that she'd made me sound like a weird perfectionist who wastes time on pointless activities. But that's kind of what you do, she said. You do get really intense about knitting, and it is kind of funny how seriously you take it. I wasn't being mean, I was just being honest. That's when I realised Clara didn't understand the difference between good-natured teasing between partners in private and publicly ridiculing someone's interests in front of strangers. There's a way to lovingly joke about your partner's quirks that includes them in the humour, and there's a way to make them the butt of the joke. I told her that if she had issues with how much time I spent knitting or how seriously I took it, we should privately talk about that. But turning it into entertainment for her friends wasn't with me. Clara OK got defensive and said I was overreacting, that everyone in relationships jokes about their partner's weird habits, and that I should be able to laugh at myself. Maybe she's right that I'm being too sensitive. Maybe this is just normal relationship dynamic that I'm not used to. But I can't, who loves, shake the feeling that someone you shouldn't make you feel small and ridiculous in front of other people, even as a joke. I haven't touched my knitting project since that night. Every time I think about picking up my needles, I hear Clara's voice describing me as this obsessive weirdo, and I just put it away again. That story's over. Making fun of your partner's genuine interests in front of strangers isn't loving teasing, it's public humiliation with a laugh track. The fact that she doubled down instead of apologising shows she values her jokes more than his feelings. Some hobbies require patience and skill, Clara. Maybe try developing some yourself. Moving on to family dynamics and the sacred art of borrowing without asking. My sister used my makeup without asking and broke it. I'm 22 and still living at home while I save money for my own place. My sister Leah is 19 and apparently thinks everything in the house belongs to her, including my personal belongings. I'm really into makeup. Not like Instagram influencer level, but I enjoy experimenting with different looks, and I've built up a decent collection over the past few years. I work part-time at a retail job that doesn't pay much, so every palette and good brush I own represents money I had to save up for. I keep all my makeup organised in my bedroom in this clear acrylic organiser that I bought specifically to keep everything visible and protected. Leah has never shown much interest in makeup. She's more of a natural look person, usually just wears mascara and lip balm, which is totally fine, but it also means she doesn't own much in terms of cosmetics. Last month, Leah had a date with someone she'd been talking to for a while. Apparently, it was a bigger deal than her usual casual hangouts, and she wanted to put in more effort with her appearance. Instead of asking to borrow something or asking me to help her with her makeup, she decided to just help herself to my collection while I was at work. I came home that evening to find my makeup organiser in complete disarray. Products were scattered around, caps were off, and my brushes were dirty. But the worst part was my favourite eyeshadow palette, this beautiful, warm-toned palette I'd saved up for months to buy. It was snapped completely in half. The palette itself was expensive, but beyond that, it was my go-to for almost every look I created. I'd hit pan on a few of the shades, which means I'd used them so much that the metal bottom was showing through. It represented hours and hours of practice and experimentation, and now it was destroyed. When I found Leah and asked what happened, she was completely casual about it. "Oh yeah, I borrowed some of your stuff for my date," she said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "I accidentally dropped that brown palette thing and it broke. Sorry. Sorry? Just sorry?" Like she'd bumped into me in the hallway. I asked her why she didn't ask permission before going through my things, and she said she figured I wouldn't mind since we're sisters. When I pointed out that the palette she broke cost me $60 and was my favourite one, she seemed genuinely surprised that it was expensive. $60 for that thing little, she said. "That's crazy. Can't you just buy another one?" I tried to explain that it wasn't just about the money, although $60 is a lot when you're making minimum wage. It was about the fact that she'd gone through my personal belongings without permission, made a mess of my organised system, and destroyed something that was important to me. Leah's response was that I was being dramatic and materialistic. She said it was just makeup, that she'd pay me back when she had money, and that I should be happy she felt comfortable enough with me to borrow my things. The pay me back part was especially frustrating because Leah has never paid me back for anything in her life. She still owes me $20 from a concert ticket I bought her 6 months ago. I talked to my parents about it, hoping they'd back me up about the importance of asking permission before taking someone's things. My mum said that sisters should share and that I should be more generous with Leah. My dad said it was just makeup and not worth fighting about. Just makeup. Like the fact that it's cosmetics automatically makes it less valid than any other personal property. The thing that bothers me most is that Leah still doesn't understand why I'm upset. In her mind, she needed to borrow some makeup. She's my sister, so she helped herself. And the fact that she broke something was just an unfortunate accident. She doesn't see how going through someone's personal belongings without permission is a violation of boundaries. She also doesn't understand that my makeup collection represents more than just products to me. It's a hobby I'm passionate about, a form of creative expression, and honestly, one of the few things that's entirely mine in this house where privacy is apparently not respected. Since then, I've had to start keeping my makeup in a locked box, which feels ridiculous but necessary. Leah acts like I'm being petty and secretive, but I can't risk her destroying more of my things. The palette is still sitting broken in my organizer because I can't afford to replace it right now, and every time I see it, I remember how little my belongings and boundaries matter to my own family. That story's over. Breaking someone's expensive hobby supplies and then acting like they're being dramatic about it is peak little sister energy. The parents siding with the boundary violator because it's just makeup shows exactly why Leah thinks this behaviour is acceptable. Maybe invest in a safe at this point. Let's talk about friendship betrayal and the art of making everything awkward for everyone. My friend posted an embarrassing video of me without permission. Owen and I have been friends since college, about 4 years now. He's always been the type of person who finds humour in everything and loves being the centre of attention at parties. Usually, this is fine, even entertaining. But last weekend, he crossed a line that I'm still processing. We were at our mutual friend's birthday party, one of those casual backyard gatherings. We'd had a few drinks, maybe 20 people. I'm not drunk, but definitely relaxed and in a good mood. At some point during the evening, our friend brought out this karaoke machine they'd rented for the party. I'm normally pretty shy about performing in front of people, but the combination of alcohol and peer pressure got me to agree to sing one song. I chose something I thought would be safe, a classic rock song that everyone knows. I figured even if I wasn't great, people would sing along, and it would be fun. What I didn't realise was that Owen was recording me the entire time. The performance itself was fine. I'm not a great singer, but I wasn't terrible either. People were clapping along and seemed to be enjoying it. I felt good about stepping out of my comfort zone and doing something that normally would have made me anxious. After I finished, Owen came up to me laughing and showed me his phone. He'd recorded the whole thing and was already editing it, adding text overlays and effects to make it look like a comedy sketch. "This is hilarious," he said. "You look so serious while you're singing. I'm definitely posting this." I immediately asked him not to. I told him I was comfortable performing for the people at the party, but I didn't want a video of me singing posted online for everyone to see. I'm a pretty private person on social media, and the idea of a potentially embarrassing video of me being shared publicly made me really uncomfortable. Owen laughed and said I was being paranoid, that it was actually a good video and people would think it was funny in a good way. I insisted that I didn't want it posted and asked him to delete it. He said okay, but I could tell he thought I was being unreasonable. The next morning, I woke up to notifications on my phone. Owen had posted the video to his Instagram story and tagged me in it. Not only that, but he'd added captions that made fun of my facial expressions and the way I moved while singing. Things like, "When you think you're a rock star," and "The confidence is real." I was mortified. Owen has like 800 followers, including people from work, family members, and acquaintances from college. The video made me look ridiculous, and his captions turned what had been a fun moment into something humiliating. I immediately messaged him asking him to take it down. He responded that it was just for 24 hours since it was a story, and that I should lighten up because everyone thought it was hilarious. But the damage was already done. People from work were commenting and sharing it to their own stories. My boss saw it and made a joke about it when I came in on Monday. Family members were asking me about it at Sunday dinner. The video had taken on a life of its own. The worst part was that Owen had edited it to emphasise the most awkward moments. He'd slowed down parts whereinto I was getting the music, added zoom effects on my face during high notes, and generally turned what had been a normal karaoke performance into a comedy reel at my expense. When I confronted him about it in person, Owen got defensive. He said that I was being too sensitive, that it wasn't even that embarrassing, and that most people would be flattered to have a funny video of them go semi-viral among our friend group. I tried to explain that it wasn't about whether other people thought it was embarrassing. It was about the fact that I'd explicitly asked him not to post it, and he'd done it anyway. It was about consent and respect for my privacy. Owen said that once you perform in public, you can't control how people react to it, or what they do with recordings. He said I should have thought about that before agreeing to do karaoke if I was so worried about being seen. That argument made me realise that Owen fundamentally doesn't understand the difference between performing for 20 friends at a party and having that performance broadcast to hundreds of people online with mocking commentary added. I asked him how he would feel if someone recorded him doing something vulnerable and posted it online after he asked them not to. He said it would depend on the video, but that he probably wouldn't care because he doesn't take himself so seriously. It's been 2 weeks since this happened, and Owen still doesn't think he did anything wrong. He keeps making jokes about me being a viral sensation, and seems to think the whole thing was harmless fun. But I can't get past the fact that he violated my trust and my privacy for the sake of content for his social media. He prioritised getting likes and comments over respecting my clearly stated boundaries. I don't feel comfortable being myself around Owen anymore, because I'm always wondering if he's going to record something and turn it into entertainment for his followers. The spontaneous, trusting dynamic of our friendship has been replaced by this constant awareness that anything I do might end up online. That story's over. Recording someone without permission after they've said no is bad enough, but adding mocking captions takes it into pure cruelty territory. Owen essentially turned his friend into content for his own entertainment while pretending it was harmless fun. Trust broken, friendship probably over. Next up, we story have about someone whose partner has mastered the art of disappointment timing. My partner always cancels plans at the last minute. I've been with Samir for about a year and 3 months now, and there's this pattern that's been driving me absolutely insane. He constantly makes plans with me, lets me get excited about them, and then cancels at the last possible moment. It started small with things that seemed reasonable. He'd cancel dinner plans because he had to work late, or we'd have to postpone a movie night because he wasn't feeling well. Normal life stuff that happens to everyone sometimes. But over time, I've realised this isn't occasional bad luck or legitimate emergencies. It's become his default way of handling commitments. Last month was probably the worst example. We'd been talking about going to this concert for weeks. I'm a huge fan of the band, and tickets were expensive. Mehmet Samir said he really wanted to go with me, and that it would be fun to experience something I was passionate about together. I bought 2 tickets with money I'd been saving, requested the night off work, and spent the whole week looking forward to it. The day of the concert, I was getting ready when Samir texted me, saying he was exhausted from work and didn't think he could handle being out late. This was at 5 p.m. for a 7 p.m. show. I was devastated, not just about missing the concert, though that was bad enough, but about the casual way he'd backed out of something he knew was important to me. I ended up going alone, which was fine, but it felt awful knowing that the empty seat next to me was supposed to be filled by someone who supposedly cared about sharing experiences with me. When I talked to him about it the next day, Samir said he was sorry, but that he'd had a really stressful week and just couldn't muster the energy. He said he'd make it up to me and that we could do something else soon, but that's always his response. He's sorry, he'll make it up to me, we can reschedule. Except we never actually reschedule. And when we do make new plans, there's always a chance he'll cancel those too. 2 weeks ago, we planned to spend Saturday afternoon at this farmer's market that I'd been wanting to check out. Nothing major, just a casual weekend activity. Saturday morning, Samir called to say his friend had invited him to play basketball and asked if we could do the farmer's market another time. I pointed out that we'd made these plans first, that I'd already planned my whole day around going with him. He said the basketball thing was spontaneous and more time sensitive, that the farmer's market would be there next weekend too. He wasn't wrong that the farmer's market would still exist the following weekend, but that wasn't really the point. The point was that he was consistently treating our plans as less important than whatever else came up. The pattern is always the same. Samir suggests an activity or agrees enthusiastically when I suggest something. We set a date and time. I arrange my schedule around our plans and usually spend mental energy looking forward to whatever we're going to do together. Then anywhere, from a few hours to a few minutes before we're supposed to meet, he finds a reason why he can't make it. Work ran late. He's not feeling well. A friend needs help with something. He forgot he had a family obligation. His car is making a weird noise. He's more tired than he thought he would be. There's always something. The reasons aren't necessarily lies, but they're not unavoidable emergencies either. They're just things that Samir prioritizes over our plans in the moment. What frustrates me most is that he doesn't seem to understand why this bothers me so much. In his mind, cancelling plans is just a normal part of life. Things come up, schedules change, and people should be flexible about it. But there's a difference between occasionally having to cancel due to genuine emergencies and consistently backing out of commitments because something better or easier presents itself. I've started to feel like I can't count on Samir for anything that requires advanced planning. If we're going to do something together, it has to be completely spontaneous. Otherwise, there's a good chance he'll find an excuse to bail. Last week I decided to test something. I made plans with Samir to go hiking on Sunday, but I didn't clear my schedule or get excited about it. I made backup plans with friends and kept my expectations low. Sure enough, Saturday night he texted saying he'd been invited to a family barbecue and asking if we could hike another day instead. I wasn't even disappointed because I'd been expecting it. But that realization made me sad in a different way. I'd gotten to the point where I couldn't trust my own partner to follow through on simple plans. When I brought this up with Samir, he got defensive and said that life is unpredictable and that I should appreciate his honesty about not being able to make it instead of getting upset about changed plans. He said that some people would just show up and have a bad attitude, but he's considerate enough to let me know in advance when he's not going to be good company. I tried to explain that constantly cancelling plans makes me feel like I'm not a priority in his life. Like our time together is something he can easily discard when anything else comes up. Samir said that wasn't true, that he loves spending time with me, but that I shouldn't take it personally when external circumstances interfere with our plans. But at what point do external circumstances just become a pattern of not prioritising your relationship? That story ends there. When someone consistently cancels plans, they're telling you exactly where you rank in their priority list. And apparently, it's somewhere below basketball games and family barbecues they forgot about. Samir has trained himself to see commitment as optional and somehow convinced himself that honesty about flakiness makes it acceptable. Our next story ventures into family territory, where comparisons are the love language. My aunt always compares me to my cousins. Family gatherings used to be something I looked forward to, but over the past few years, they've become exercises in enduring constant comparisons to my more successful relatives. My Aunt Juliet seems to have appointed herself the family scorekeeper, and according to her metrics, I'm losing badly. It started when my cousin Tyler got engaged last year. During Thanksgiving dinner, Juliet made sure everyone knew that Tyler was not only getting married, but had also just gotten promoted to manager at his company. It's so wonderful to see young people really getting their lives together, she said, looking directly at me. Some people just have that drive, you know? I was 25 at the time, single and working a job I actually enjoyed, but that didn't come with an impressive title. According to Juliet's worldview, this made me a cautionary tale rather than someone living their own timeline. The comparisons got worse after my cousin Brooke bought her first house 6 months later. At our next family barbecue, Juliet spent 20 minutes giving everyone a tour of the house photos on her phone, making sure to mention the price, the neighbourhood, and how smart Brooke had been to invest in real estate so young. Some people understand the importance of building equity, she said, again with that pointed look in my direction. It's never too early to start thinking about your financial future. I was still renting an apartment, which I was perfectly happy with. I lived in a great neighbourhood, had roommates I liked, and wasn't ready to commit to home ownership. But to Juliet, my housing situation was evidence of poor life planning. Then my cousin Derek started graduate school, and Juliet had new ammunition for her comparison campaign. Derek is really investing in himself, she announced at Christmas dinner. He understands that education is the key to advancement. Some people get comfortable and stop pushing themselves to grow. I have a bachelor's degree and have taken several professional development courses through my job, but apparently that didn't count as real education in Juliet's assessment. The worst incident happened at my grandmother's birthday party 2 months ago. Juliet had brought photo albums to show everyone pictures of Tyler's wedding, Brooke's new house, and Derek's graduation. She was going through each album methodically, making sure everyone saw evidence of her children's achievements. When she got to a section about Derek's academic awards, she looked up at me and said, "You know, it's not too late for you to go back to school. Derek always says that age is just a number when it comes to education. Maybe you could look into some programs." The implication was clear. At 26, I was already behind and needed to scramble to catch up to where my younger cousin was already heading. I tried to deflect by mentioning that I'd recently gotten a promotion at work, something I was actually proud of. Juliet nodded politely and said, "That's nice, dear," then immediately pivoted back to Derek's thesis topic and how impressed his professors were with his research. My promotion wasn't marriage, home ownership, or graduate school, so it didn't register as a real achievement worth celebrating or even acknowledging. The pattern is always the same. Juliet brings up something wonderful that Tyler, Brooke, or Derek has accomplished, then makes some comment about how some people understand what it takes to succeed, or how it's never too late for others to get their lives on track. She never says my name directly, but everyone knows exactly who she's talking about. The pointed looks, the strategic pauses, the way she glances around the room to make sure people are connecting her comments to my presence. It's all very deliberate. Last month, I decided to limit my contact with extended family events. When my mum asked why I wasn't coming to my cousin's housewarming party, I explained how uncomfortable Juliet's constant comparisons made me feel. My mum said I was being too sensitive, that Juliet was just proud of her kids and didn't mean anything personal by her comments. She suggested that maybe instead of avoiding family gatherings, I should use my cousin's success as motivation to push myself harder. Even my own mother was buying into Juliet's narrative that I was somehow lacking compared to my cousins. The thing is, I'm actually happy with my life. I like my job, I have good friends, I'm financially stable, and I'm working toward goals that matter to me. But Juliet has created this atmosphere where none of that counts because it doesn't fit her specific timeline of adult milestones. I'm tired of being treated like the family disappointment just because I'm not married, don't own property, and haven't pursued advanced degrees. There are different ways to build a meaningful life, but Juliet only recognises one path as valid. The most frustrating part is that Tyler, Brooke, and Derek are all nice people who've never made me feel bad about my choices. This competition exists entirely in Juliet's mind, but she's determined to make it everyone else's reality too. That story's over. Juliet has turned family gatherings into some twisted life achievement competition where she gets to play judge and jury. The passive-aggressive "some people" comments while staring directly at you is psychological warfare disguised as family pride. Maybe Juliet should invest in a hobby that doesn't involve ranking her relatives. Speaking of people who cross boundaries without permission, this next story is about someone whose friend treats restaurant meals like a buffet. My friend always eats off my plate without asking. Theo and I have been friends for about 2 years, and he has this habit that's been driving me crazy since the first time we went out to eat together. He helps himself to food off my plate without asking, and he acts like this is completely normal behaviour. The first time it happened, we were at a casual burger place. I'd ordered these sweet potato fries that I was really excited about, and Theo had gotten regular fries with his meal. About halfway through eating, he just reached across the table with his fork and took several of my sweet potato fries. I was so surprised that I didn't say anything in the moment. I figured maybe he wanted to try them and was just being casual about it. But then he did it again a few minutes later, and again after that. By the end of the meal, he'd eaten probably a third of my fries. When I mentioned it later, he said he thought I wouldn't mind sharing since we're friends. He said his family always shared food at meals, and that's just how he was raised. I told him I preferred to be asked first, and he said, sure, no problem. But nothing changed. Every time we went out to eat after that, Theo would help himself to something from my plate. Sometimes it was just a bite or two, but other times he'd eat significant portions of my food. The worst incident happened last month when we went to this nice, I'd been looking forward to it all week, an Italian restaurant for my birthday. Dinard had specifically chosen a pasta dish that I'd been craving. It was more expensive than I usually spend on dinner, but it was my birthday and I wanted to treat myself. Theo ordered a salad and soup, saying he wasn't very hungry, but once our food arrived, he kept reaching over to my plate with his fork. First, he took a few bites of pasta, then some of the chicken, then more pasta. He was eating directly off my plate while carrying on conversation, like nothing unusual was happening. By the time I finished my meal, Theo had eaten at least a quarter of it. I was still hungry, but I felt weird about ordering dessert or anything else, because I didn't want him to help himself to that too. After dinner, I finally confronted him directly about it. I told him that eating off my plate without asking made me uncomfortable, and that I'd prefer if he ordered enough food for himself instead of supplementing his meals with mine. Theo seemed genuinely surprised that this bothered me. He said that sharing food was a sign of friendship and intimacy, that it meant we were comfortable with each other. He said most people would be flattered that he felt close enough to me to share meals. I tried to explain that there's a difference between offering to share and having someone just take your food without permission, that even close friends should ask before helping themselves to each other's plates. Theo said I was being possessive about food and that it was weird to be so territorial about something as simple as a meal. He said that in his culture, sharing food was normal and expected, and that Americans were too individualistic about eating. I felt bad after he said that, like maybe I was being unreasonable or culturally insensitive. But I also felt frustrated that my preferences about my own food weren't being respected. The pattern continued over the next few weeks. Theo would order smaller portions or lighter meals, then supplement them by eating from my plate. When I started ordering less food to prevent him from taking so much, he'd comment that I wasn't eating enough and insist that I needed to order more. It felt like a no-win situation. If I ordered the amount of food I actually wanted, Theo would eat some of it and leave me hungry. If I ordered less to account for what he'd take, he'd pressure me to order more, which would just give him more to take from. 3 weeks ago, I decided to try a different approach. I ordered my usual amount of food, but when Theo reached for my plate, I gently moved it away and said, "I'm actually really hungry tonight and want to finish all of this myself." Theo looked hurt and said, "Wow, okay," in this wounded tone that made me feel guilty. He spent the rest of the meal making comments about how some people get weird about food and how he missed eating with people who weren't so uptight about sharing. Since then, our dinner outings have been awkward. Theo still occasionally reaches for my food, but now, when I protect my plate, he acts like I'm being rude or selfish. he started making jokes about how I guard my food like a dog, and how he has to ask permission for everything now. The jokes make me feel like I'm being unreasonable, but I also don't think it's too much to ask that someone not eat my food without permission. I'm paying for my meal, I've ordered the amount I want to eat, and I shouldn't have to share it just because we're friends. Last week, Theo suggested that we start ordering family style when we go out, so everything would be shared from the beginning. But I don't want to eat family style every time we go out. Sometimes I want to order exactly what I'm craving and eat all of it myself. I'm starting to wonder if this friendship is worth the constant negotiation over something as basic as being able to eat my own food. That story's over. The absolute nerve of turning food theft into a cultural bonding experience and then guilt-tripping someone for wanting to eat their own meal is peak manipulation. Theo has essentially trained himself to underorder and rely on his friends' plates to fill up, then acts wounded when called out on it. Maybe order an appetizer next time, Theo. Our next story takes us into the world of sibling rivalry and gaming console warfare. My sibling takes over my gaming console every time I step away. I'm 17 and my brother Kai is 14, and we share a PlayStation that our parents bought for the family about 2 years ago. In theory, we're supposed to take turns and be fair about gaming time, but in practice, Kai has figured out how to monopolize it almost completely. The way it works is that I'll be playing a game, usually something I've been working on for a while and am really invested in. Maybe I'm in the middle of a difficult boss fight, or I'm exploring a new area, or I'm playing online with friends. At some point, I need to take a break. Maybe I need to use the bathroom, or get a snack, or answer the door, or help with something around the house. I'll pause the game and step away, planning to come right back and continue playing. But by the time I return, usually no more than 5 or 10 minutes later, Kai has taken over the console and started playing his own game. When I ask him to give it back so I can finish what I was doing, he always has the same response. "You left, so I thought you were done." Or, "I've been waiting for my turn and you walked away, so now it's my turn." The most frustrating part is that Kai will then play for hours. He's not just taking a quick turn while I'm away, he's claiming the entire rest of the evening. Even if I was only gone for 5 minutes, he'll act like I've forfeited my gaming time completely. Last weekend was the worst example. I'd been playing this RPG for about an hour, working through a really challenging dungeon that I'd been stuck on for days. I finally made it to the boss fight and died on my first attempt, which was frustrating but normal for this particular boss. Right as I was about to try again, my mum called me to help bring groceries in from the car. I paused the game and told Kai I'd be right back, that I was in the middle of something important and needed to finish this boss fight. The grocery thing took maybe 10 minutes. When I came back inside, Kai had switched to his own game and was playing online with his friends. My RPG was no longer running, which meant I'd lost my progress in the dungeon and would have to start the whole thing over again. When I confronted him about it, Kai said he thought I was done playing since I'd left the room. I pointed out that I'd specifically told him I was coming right back, but he claimed he didn't hear me say that. I asked him to get off so I could continue my game, and he said he'd already started playing with his friends online and couldn't quit in the middle of a match. That match turned into another match, which turned into another, and before I knew it, it was bedtime, and I hadn't gotten to play at all. This pattern happens constantly. Kai has learned that all he has to do is wait for me to step away from the console, for any reason, then he can claim it and keep it for the rest of the day. The worst part is that he's strategic about it. If I'm playing a single-player game that can be paused, he'll wait until I leave, and then switch to an online game that can't be paused. If I'm playing online with friends, he'll wait until I take a bathroom break, and then start his own online session. He's also learnt to time his takeovers for maximum impact. If I sit down to play after dinner, he'll wait until I get up to help with dishes or something, then claim that since it's getting late, he should get the rest of the evening to play. I've tried different strategies to prevent this. I've tried leaving the game running when I step away, but Kai will just quit out of it and start his own game anyway. I've tried asking him to wait for me to come back, but he always claims he didn't hear me or forgot. When I complained to our parents about this, they said we need to work it out between ourselves and that they don't want to referee our gaming disputes. They suggested we make a schedule, but Kai ignores any schedule that doesn't give him exactly what he wants. The most frustrating thing is that Kai never extends the same courtesy to me that he demands for himself. When he's playing and needs to step away, he'll ask me to watch his game and make sure nobody touches it. But when I step away from my games, he acts like that's his signal to take over. Last week I tried calling his bluff. When he got up to get a snack in the middle of his game, I switched to my own game. When he came back and asked what I was doing, I said, "You left, so I thought you were done." Kai completely lost it. He said I was being unfair and that he was obviously coming right back. He ran to get our parents and complained that I'd stolen his gaming time. Our parents made me give the console back to him and told me not to be petty, so apparently the rule only works in one direction. When I step away, it means I'm done, and Kai can take over. But when Kai steps away, I'm supposed to guard his game and wait for him to return. I've started trying to plan my gaming sessions around times when Kai isn't home, but his schedule is unpredictable and he always seems to show up right when I'm getting into a good game. Yesterday, I was playing this new game I'd been excited about for weeks. I'd been playing for about 30 minutes when I needed to take a phone call from a friend. I told Kai I'd be back in a few minutes and asked him not to touch the console. When I finished my call 20 minutes later, Kai was deep into his own game. He said the phone call had gone on longer than I'd said it would, so he figured I was done playing for the day. I pointed out that 20 minutes wasn't that long and that I'd specifically asked him to wait for me. He said that 20 minutes was long enough for him to get bored waiting, and that if I really wanted to keep playing, I shouldn't have taken such a long phone call. It's gotten to the point where I feel like I can't step away from the console for any reason when I'm playing, because I know Kai will immediately take it over and then refuse to give it back. That story's over. Kai has basically weaponized the concept of you snooze, you lose, and turned it into a full-time gaming monopolization strategy. The fact that he gets parental backup when the same rule gets applied to him shows this is a masterclass in younger sibling manipulation. Maybe time for a gaming schedule written in permanent marker. Let's move into relationship territory, where the past never stays buried. My partner brings up old arguments during new ones. Mira and I have been together for about 14 months now, and we have this recurring problem that's making every disagreement feel impossible to resolve. Whenever we have any kind of conflict, no matter how small or unrelated, Mira brings up every fight we've ever had before. It started becoming obvious about 6 months into our relationship. We had a minor disagreement about whose turn it was to do dishes, something that should have been resolved in 5 minutes. But instead of just talking about the dishes, Mira brought up a completely unrelated argument we'd had weeks earlier about me being late to one of her work events. At first, I thought it was just because the relationship was still new, and we were both learning how to fight constructively. But as time went on, I realised this was Mira's standard operating procedure for any conflict. Last month, we had what should have been a simple conversation about me wanting to spend Saturday afternoon with my friends instead of going to her cousin's baby shower. I wasn't trying to be difficult. I just had plans that I'd made weeks in advance, and I didn't think it was unreasonable to ask if she could go to the shower alone. But instead of discussing the baby shower situation, Mira immediately brought up the time 3 months ago when I'd fallen asleep during a movie she'd wanted to watch together. Then she mentioned the time I'd forgotten to pick up milk on my way home from work. Then she brought up a disagreement we'd had about my driving when we first started dating. Within 10 minutes, we weren't talking about the baby shower anymore. We were rehashing every minor issue from our entire relationship history, and I was suddenly defending decisions I'd made months ago that I thought we'd already resolved. The pattern is always the same. We start with one specific issue, but Mira quickly expands it into a comprehensive review of everything I've ever done that bothered her. She presents these past incidents as evidence that I have consistent character flaws or that I don't care about her feelings. What makes it especially frustrating is that I never know which past arguments are going to resurface. Something I thought we'd talked through and moved past will suddenly reappear as ammunition in a completely unrelated fight. 2 weeks ago, we had a disagreement about money. I'd bought a video game without mentioning it to her first, and she was upset that I was spending money on entertainment when we'd been talking about saving for a vacation together. I understood her point and was willing to have a conversation about our spending habits and how we communicate about purchases. But instead of focusing on that, Mira brought up the time 2 months ago when I'd been tired and cranky after a long day at work. She said that incident proved I don't handle stress well, and that my poor stress management was probably why I was making impulsive purchases now. The video game cost $30. The connection she was drawing to my mood on one random Tuesday in October made no sense, but suddenly we were arguing about my general attitude and personality rather than about a simple spending decision. I tried to point out that the stress thing and the video game thing were separate issues, but Mira said that everything in a relationship is connected, and that I was being naive to think our problems existed in isolation. Maybe she's right that relationship issues are interconnected, but bringing up every past disagreement during every new one makes it impossible to actually resolve anything. Instead of solving problems as they come up, we just keep accumulating them into this ever-growing pile of unresolved resentment. The worst part is that Mira remembers details about past arguments that I've completely forgotten. She'll bring up something I said during a fight 4 months ago, quote it word for word, and use it as evidence for whatever point she's trying to make now. Meanwhile, I can barely remember what we argued about last week, let alone the exact phrasing I used or the specific context of the conversation. This makes me feel like I'm constantly walking into traps. Anything I say during a current argument might be used against me months later in a completely different context. It's like having a prosecutor who's been building a case against me since the day we met. Last week I tried to address this pattern directly. I told Mira that I felt like our fights were becoming unproductive because we kept relitigating old issues instead of focusing on current problems. Her response was that the old issues weren't actually resolved, that just because we'd stopped talking about them didn't mean they were fixed. She said that my tendency to want to move on from problems was actually part of the problem, because it meant I never really learned from my mistakes. I tried to explain that there's a difference between learning from past mistakes and bringing up every past mistake during every new disagreement, that constantly revisiting old arguments was making it hard for us to address current issues effectively. Mira said that I was trying to control how she processed our relationship problems, and that bringing up patterns of behaviour was a valid way to understand current conflicts. Maybe she's right that I sometimes want to move on from arguments, but I also think they're too quickly. Has to be some kind of statute of limitations on relationship grievances. At some point, issues need to be either resolved or recognised as incompatibilities, not stored up as ammunition for future fights. I'm starting to feel like every disagreement we have is actually about our entire relationship history, rather than whatever specific issue triggered the argument. It's exhausting to have to defend not just my current actions, but every decision I've made since we started dating. That story's over. Mira has turned relationship arguments into comprehensive performance reviews, where every past mistake gets weaponized against current issues. When someone keeps a running tally of your flaws to deploy during fights, they're not trying to resolve problems, they're trying to win them. Maybe it's time to start keeping your own scorecard, Mira. Our next story is about the devastating betrayal of shared secrets becoming group entertainment. I trusted Celine with something deeply personal about 6 months ago, and she turned it into group chat entertainment the very next day. We've been close friends for about 2 years, and I genuinely thought I could confide in her about anything. The situation started when I was going through a really difficult time with my family. My parents were getting divorced after 20 years of marriage, and it was messy in all the worst ways. They were fighting about money, custody of my younger sister, who would keep the house, everything you can imagine. As the oldest kid, I was getting pulled into the middle of it constantly. Both my parents were using me as a messenger service, an emotional dumping ground. My mum would call me crying about how my dad was being unreasonable about the settlement. My dad would text me asking if I thought he should get a lawyer because my mum was being vindictive. My sister was acting out at school because of the stress at home, and somehow that became my responsibility to handle too. I was completely overwhelmed and needed someone to talk to who wasn't involved in the situation. Selena seemed like the obvious choice. She'd been supportive during other difficult times in my life, and I trusted her to keep sensitive information private. So I called her one evening when things had been particularly bad. I told her everything that was happening, how guilty I felt about the divorce, even though it wasn't my fault, how exhausted I was from being everyone's therapist, how worried I was about my sister. I even shared some specific details about the financial arguments my parents were having, things that were embarrassing and that I definitely didn't want other people knowing about. Selene was really understanding during the call. She said all the right things about how it wasn't my job to fix my parents' marriage, how I needed to set boundaries, how the situation would eventually get better. I felt so much relief after talking to her, like I finally had someone in my corner who understood what I was dealing with. The next day, I was hanging out with our mutual friend group when someone made a joke about divorce lawyers. Another friend immediately said, "Oh, like the one dealing with the drama at home," and looked directly at me. I was confused about how they knew anything about my family situation, so I asked what they were talking about. That's when I found out that Selene had shared everything I'd told her in our group chat the night before. Not just the basic facts that my parents were getting divorced, but specific details about their fights, about how I was feeling, even about the financial stuff that I'd specifically said was embarrassing. She'd presented it all as this dramatic story for everyone's entertainment. When I checked the group chat history, I could see the entire conversation. Selena had started with, "You guys won't believe what's happening in her family," and then proceeded to share every single thing I'd confided in her. Other people in the group were responding with shocked emojis and asking for more details, which Selena happily provided. The worst part was seeing how she'd framed some of the information. Things I'd said out of frustration or exhaustion were presented as if they were my actual opinions about my parents. Concerns I'd shared about my sister's behaviour were turned into gossip about family dysfunction. I confronted Selene about it immediately. I asked her why she thought it was okay to share such personal information about my family with everyone. Her response was that she was just looking for advice on how to help me, that she thought other people in the group might have good suggestions for dealing with divorce situations. But that explanation didn't match what I'd seen in the chat. Nobody was offering advice or support. They were just reacting to the drama and asking for more details about my family's private business. When I pointed this out, Selena got defensive. She said I was overreacting, that everyone in our friend group cares about me and wants to help. She said I should be grateful that I have friends who are invested in my well-being instead of getting upset about how they found out what was happening. I tried to explain that there's a difference between friends caring about you and friends gossiping about your personal problems for entertainment. That sharing someone's private information without permission is a violation of trust, regardless of the intentions behind it. Selene said that I was being paranoid and secretive, that real friends don't keep things from each other, and that I should expect people to talk about what's happening in my life when I bring up serious problems. But I hadn't brought up my problems to the group. I'd confided in one person who I thought I could trust to keep that information private. The fallout from this has been ongoing for months. Every time something happens with my parents' divorce, I wonder if Selene is going to share it with everyone. I've stopped confiding in her about anything important, which has basically ended the close friendship we used to have. The rest of our friend group acts like nothing happened, but I can tell they know details about my family that I never shared with them directly. It creates this weird dynamic where I feel like everyone knows more about my personal business than I'm comfortable with. Last month, when my parents finally settled their divorce, one of our friends made a comment about how I must be relieved that all that financial stuff was finally worked out. I'd never told that person anything about the financial aspects of my parents' divorce, which confirmed that Selene had shared even more details than I'd initially realised. The most hurtful part is that Selena still doesn't understand why I'm upset about this. She continues to act like she was being a good friend by involving other people in my problems, and she seems genuinely confused about why I don't trust her with sensitive information anymore. I've learned that some people see other people's problems as content for their own social interactions. They don't distinguish between being supportive and being entertained by drama, even when that drama involves someone they care about. That story's over. The speed at which Selena turned a vulnerable conversation into group chat entertainment shows exactly why she can't be trusted with anything important ever again. When someone treats your personal crisis like their own private reality show, they've shown you who they really are. Trust broken, friendship over, lesson learned the hard way. Moving on to family dynamics and the sacred art of seat claiming. My cousin stole my spot at family dinner just to mess with me. This happened at my grandmother's house last Sunday, and I'm still annoyed about how petty and deliberate the whole thing was. My cousin Elias is 24, 2 years older than me, and he's always had this thing where he likes to push boundaries just to see what he can get away with. Every Sunday, our extended family has dinner at my grandmother's house. It's been a tradition for years, and over time everyone has sort of naturally settled into regular seating arrangements. Not assigned seats exactly, but everyone knows where they usually sit, and it works out fine. I always sit in this specific chair at the dining room table. It's next to my grandmother, which I like because I enjoy talking to her during meals, and it has a good view of the kitchen so I can help serve food when needed. I've been sitting in that same spot for probably 3 years now, ever since I got old enough to sit at the main table instead of the kids' table. Last Sunday, I arrived at my grandmother's house at my usual time, about 15 minutes before dinner was supposed to start. I went into the kitchen to help with final preparations, expecting to sit down in my regular spot when everything was ready. But when I walked into the dining room, Elias was sitting in my chair. Not just sitting in it, but sprawled out comfortably, like he'd been there for hours, scrolling through his phone and acting completely natural. I stood there for a moment, thinking maybe he'd just sat down temporarily and would move when he realised it was my usual spot. But when I didn't say anything right away, he looked up at me and smiled in this smug way that made it clear he knew exactly what he was doing. "Hey," he said casually, like nothing was unusual about the situation. I asked him if he could move, because that was where I usually sat. Elias looked around the table dramatically and said, "I don't see your name on it." Then he laughed like he'd made the most clever joke in the world. I pointed out that everyone in the family knew that was my regular seat, that I'd been sitting there every week for years. Elias shrugged and said, "First come, first serve," even though he knew I'd been in the kitchen helping and hadn't had a chance to sit down yet. The rest of the family was starting to gather around the table, and I didn't want to make a big scene over seating arrangements. There were other empty chairs available, so I reluctantly sat somewhere else. But I was frustrated by how deliberately Elias had created this conflict. What made it worse was that Elias spent the entire meal making jokes about his new favourite seat and how much he liked the view from that spot. He kept glancing at me while he talked to my grandmother, like he was rubbing it in that he'd taken over my usual interaction with her. Every time someone asked him a question or included him in conversation, he'd make some comment about how comfortable he was or how he might have to make this his permanent spot. It was clear that he wasn't just sitting in a different chair, he was actively enjoying the fact that he'd displaced me. After dinner, when people were starting to clean up, I approached Elias privately and asked him why he'd felt the need to take my seat. He acted confused and said he didn't realise seating arrangements were such a big deal to me. I explained that it wasn't about the physical chair, it was about the fact that he'd deliberately done something he knew would annoy me, and then spent the whole meal gloating about it. Elias said I was being dramatic and possessive over a piece of furniture. He said that if I really cared about sitting in a specific spot, I should have gotten there earlier instead of expecting people to save seats for me. But that wasn't what happened. I'd arrived at my normal time and was helping in the kitchen like I always do. Elias had specifically chosen to sit in my usual spot knowing it would create conflict, and then acted like I was being unreasonable for being bothered by it. The most frustrating part was that other family members seemed to think it was funny. My uncle made jokes about musical chairs and how we needed assigned seating like at a wedding. My aunt said that maybe it was good for me to try sitting somewhere different for once. Nobody seemed to recognise that Elias had deliberately created drama over something that was working fine for everyone. They treated it like playful family banter instead of acknowledging that he'd been intentionally disruptive. This past Sunday, I made sure to arrive earlier and sit down immediately, but I could tell Elias was looking for other ways to mess with our established routines. He spent the meal making comments about how territorial people can be about meaningless things, clearly referencing the previous week's situation. I know this is a small thing in the grand scheme of family dynamics, but it bothers me that Elias seems to enjoy creating unnecessary conflict just because he can. It's like he gets entertainment value out of disrupting things that work fine when he's not interfering. The worst part is that now I have to be strategic about something as simple as sitting down for family dinner. Instead of just helping in the kitchen and sitting in my usual spot, I have to worry about whether Elias is going to try to mess with me again. That story's over. Elias turned family dinner into a territorial power play and then acted like his cousin was being dramatic for caring about basic courtesy. The fact that other family members found it amusing instead of calling out his deliberate troublemaking shows where he learned this behaviour. Maybe start carrying a place card, because apparently basic respect isn't guaranteed at family gatherings. Let's move into financial territory, where friends suddenly develop selective amnesia about their wallets. My friend tricked me into paying for everything on our night out. This happened 2 weekends ago with my friend Jonas, and I'm still processing how manipulated I feel about the whole situation. We'd been planning to go out for dinner and drinks for about a week, just a casual night to catch up, since we hadn't seen each other in a while. Jonas suggested this new restaurant that had gotten good reviews, somewhere I'd never been but was excited to try. When I looked at the menu online on the pricier side, but Jonas, I noticed it was definitely said it would be worth it and that he'd been wanting to check it out too. So there you have it, a collection of stories about people who somehow missed the basic human decency memo. From friends who treat your personal crises like their own entertainment network, to family members who turn dinner seating into territorial warfare, these stories remind us that everyone's dealing with their own version of boundary issues and social blind spots. Sweet dreams, and may your overthinking brain find something more productive to focus on than replaying these kinds of interactions from your own life.